Good evening and welcome to the City of Dublin Planning and Zoning Commission. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive or access via the live stream on the city's website. We welcome public participation, including public comment. At this time, if you'll please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ms. Beal, I'll turn the time over to you for roll call.
Mr. Way?
Here.
Ms. Harder?
Here.
Mr. Supelak?
Here.
Mr. Shinnok?
Here.
Ms. Call? Mr. Fishman? Here. Mr. Schneier?
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Beal. Tonight we have documents and a set of meeting minutes from the September 15th meeting. Has everyone had the opportunity to review the documentation and the meeting minutes? Seeing yes, I will entertain a motion for approval of the documents and the meeting minutes.
Approval. No movements. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harder.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak. Ms. Beal.
Mr. Shinnok?
Yes.
Ms. Harder?
Yes.
Mr. Way?
Approve.
Mr. Supelak?
Yes.
Ms. Call?
Yes.
Mr. Schneier?
Yes.
Mr. Fishman?
Yes.
The Planning and Zoning Commission is an advisory board to City Council when rezoning and platting of property are under consideration. In such cases, City Council receives a recommendation from the Commission. In other cases, the Commission has the final decision-making responsibility. In any of these cases, anyone who intends to address the Commission must be sworn in. There are no cases tonight eligible for the consent agenda. The agenda order is typically determined at the beginning of the meeting by the chair. The rules and regulations of the Planning and Zoning Commission state that no new agenda items are to be introduced after 10:30 p.m. For those in attendance, anyone who intends to address this commission on any of the administrative cases this evening, will you please stand, raise your right hand, and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this commission this evening? Thank you. Tonight, our first case is an informal case. This is Panera Bread, located at 6665 Perimeter Loop Road, 22-109 AFDP and amended final development plan. This application is a request for construction of a drive-through for an existing restaurant on an approximately 2-acre site zoned planned commerce district perimeter center. The site is located approximately 615 feet southeast of the intersection of Perimeter Loop Road with Avery Muirfield Drive. Mr. Will, welcome, and I'll turn the time over to you for our case presentation.
Thank you and good evening. As you mentioned, the roughly 2-acre site is located southeast of Avery Muirfield Drive and Perimeter Loop, north of the on-off ramps for 33 westbound. Development in this corridor is predominantly auto-oriented, leveraging its proximity to the interchange. The site is zoned perimeter center. Zooming in, you can see the 5,000 square foot existing Panera restaurant. There is a 50-foot building and pavement setback along the frontage with 161 and US 33. There's also a 30-foot pavement setback on both Avery Muirfield Drive and Perimeter Loop, and then an additional 50-foot building setback on both of these thoroughfares as well. There's an existing berm between the restaurant and the highway ramps, as well as a landscape hedge on both Perimeter Loop and Avery Muirfield Drive that screens the existing parking. The final development plan was approved by Planning and Zoning along with a conditional use of outdoor seating back in April of 2001. Shortly after, City Council approved a rezoning to create a subarea L from subarea E within the perimeter center. This was done to allow for a reduction in parking as well as increased building height for the restaurant, while keeping with the development standards and character of the existing perimeter center development. Shown here at left is the existing restaurant with a view showing the rear drive where the applicant is proposing to adapt that drive for a drive-through use. Here, looking at the proposed development concept, a drive-through is a permitted accessory use to the permitted use. The development text does require 8 stacking per exchange window. 1 exchange window is proposed. The 8 stacking spaces are shown on the site plan. Here again, you can see the existing berm behind the restaurant, separating that from the US 33 on-off ramps, as well as the landscape hedges on the east and west side of the existing site. To accommodate the drive-through, the applicant is proposing to make modifications to parking. On the left of the screen, the red, the applicant is proposing to remove 11 spaces, and then highlighted in blue on the right, proposing to replace a portion of this parking with 7 new spaces. This leads to a net reduction of 4 spaces. To accommodate the additional spaces, a existing stormwater basin would have to be modified. The applicant would need to continue to work with staff to ensure that stormwater management requirements are met. The applicant had originally intended to keep the parking highlighted in red, but it would have put them behind the stacking and queuing area for the drive-through. So the staff advised against that. Here you can see on the left the spaces that were highlighted in red along Muirfield Drive, which would be replaced to allow for the drive-through. Some additional landscaping would be put in their place. On the right is the existing dry basin, which would be reshaped to provide for additional new parking. Oops. So a little parking history in the proposed parking plan. The original development standards required 117 spaces. This is for both the 5,000 square foot restaurant and the outdoor seating area. This parking was reduced to 82 by the rezoning. A condition of approval with this was, though, that the applicant provide or require staff for the restaurant to park at the adjacent Perimeter Center shopping center, and that a crosswalk be installed along with signage to provide safe crossing. It does not appear that this was ever done. Of the 82 approved spaces, only 81 were constructed. It is unclear why this was done. The applicant is now proposing 77, which is a slight reduction, as noted. With this informal review, the applicant is requesting feedback. The 2 discussion questions that we have are, is the commission supportive of the proposed drive-through layout and site circulation? And is the commission supportive of the reduction of parking? And of course, any other considerations by the commission? The applicant is here in attendance. I am happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Will. Is the applicant present? Would you like to make a statement or a presentation this evening? Otherwise, we will move to questions.
Yeah, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Benson Beat. I'm with MS Consultants. We're the civil engineer for this, helping Covelli and the property owner kind of work through some of these unique issues for this site. I'm happy to answer or have a discussion on any technical matters. Here with us tonight is Bob Bundy, who's representing the property owner, and 3 members with Covelli, who's the franchisee for Panera. They could probably talk a little bit more about daily operations of the building and grounds, but yeah, here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for having this informal session with us.
But first, if you could state your address for the
Oh,
record.
sure. Yeah, it's sorry, just switched companies here. Need to tell you my work address. 2221 Schrock Road, Columbus, Ohio.
Thank you. All right, we'll handle questions on this informal review together for both staff and the applicant this evening. So looking to the commission for any questions that you might have for staff or the applicant.
I have a quick
Mis-
question for staff.
Mr. Chinook.
Sorry. The question I have is on signage. Obviously, we'll need to have new signage for the drive-through. Is that part of this, or does that affect the current signage? They have to reduce the current signage they have out there?
The applicant would be proposing additional signs be included to provide the drive-through, including infrastructure needed for the drive-through.
Okay. But that would mean a reduction, perhaps, depending on what the allowances are. It could be a reduction in their current sign package? Not necessarily.
No, not for the signs themselves, just other graphics for the drive-through.
Okay.
Yeah, a menu board would be considered separate of their ground or wall signs that they have.
Thank you, Ms. Roush. Mr. Way.
So the agreement that's in place with Giant Eagle for shared parking, do we know, is there a quantity of parking that was identified for the use of Panera?
So I am unfamiliar with the details of it, just that a parking arrangement was created, but not the number of spaces.
And the crosswalk doesn't appear in the air photos. I assume it's pretty safe to say it was never implemented.
Correct.
And this may be for the applicant. I may shift. Has there been any discussion about, as part of this project, to actually implement the crosswalk and to link the perimeter parking to the site?
Yeah, I think there has been some discussion about hosting employee parking across the street and whatever accommodations need to be made for that. I think they're willing to accommodate.
So basically following through from the original agreement and implement the crosswalk.
Yeah, we
Would
can
be
work
the-
through the details of that with planning staff.
Okay.
And this may be more for the applicant for day-to-day operations. Could you identify where deliveries are received and times that those deliveries would be received, either during operational hours or after hours? If you could come up to the microphone and state your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, my name's Dwayne Jackson. I'm a Director of Construction for Covelli Enterprises, 3900 East Market Street, Warren, Ohio, 44484. Deliveries are typically received at night. We have enough cafes in the market. I think there's 50 or 60 here in the Columbus area. We can basically dictate what time we want them and where we take the deliveries. Typically, we take deliveries in the back door. And it's the wee hours of the night. So it really doesn't come into play with customer traffic or drive-through traffic.
Thank you. And do you know, do you have other Panera franchises that exist in our market area?
Yes, we do. And we submitted, I think there was 10 locations. Okay, yeah, we submitted a letter and 10 locations locally. Just so you guys could actually kind of take a look and see what we're telling you is accurate. They went from Sunbury to Delaware, High Street in Columbus, 3rd Avenue in Columbus. I'm sure that's what we're looking at right here. Several of these 10 also do not have a bypass lane. And as you see, most of them, I think all of them up there actually have 77 or less parking spaces. And that goes back to, 2014.
All right, looking to the commission for other questions for the applicant. Mr.
I
Chinook.
did have a question on the bypass lane. So you're not concerned about not having a bypass lane? You said your other locations do not have one?
I tell you the truth, we have, just in Columbus, we have 3. And I can provide all the data you guys want. I think in Cincinnati, in the Cincinnati market, I think we have 7 of them total. We have well over 50 in all of our markets combined. And that basically starts in Erie, Pennsylvania, so North Coast, all the way down to West Palm in Florida. We have 250 or 60 Panera locations. The customers dictate everything we do. We don't try to fix anything if it's not broke. But the customer need, customer request, customer feedback drives everything. When the first drive-through that we put in without a bypass lane, I mean, we beat it up internally. These are people with decades of restaurant experience. It's been Panera since 1998. Before then, it was 30 years of McDonald's experience. We had over 50 McDonald's restaurants, the owner did. There's a lot of experience. We weighed heavily whether this was going to upset the customers because they're going to be waiting, because they couldn't get out of lane should they choose to. Like I said, the first one we did, I think, goes back to 2013, 2014. And I mean, we've moved forward with a lot of them since then, just because we found that, the customers want it, and, not being able to exit the lane has not presented a big problem. If it did, we wouldn't keep doing it. Ideally, just for customer satisfaction, I mean, we do try to incorporate a bypass lane whenever possible, but it's not always possible. Since 2020, well, since COVID, and even before COVID, I will say, the trends are changing. Our building sizes went from 5,000, 5,500 square feet, which I think Avery falls in that range. I forget exactly what the square footage is, to 3,900, 3,900. Parking numbers are way smaller. I mean, when we develop sites, we're looking for smaller sites, and that's all based on customer feedback. We're becoming less social and more, everybody's in a hurry through the drive-through.
Thank you.
I have two other follow-up questions. Is the drive-through going to be the same hours of operation as the restaurant? Excuse me.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the follow-up question to that is, I know it's based on square footage, but are you reducing the number of seating inside the restaurant based on the reduction of parking, or is the seating going to remain the same?
At this particular location, it's moving forward with new cafes. We have been. They've gotten smaller, and basically it's the dining room's gotten smaller. The kitchen is what it is, and it's what's needed. When we go into these older locations, what do you do? I mean, you're not going to tear part of the building down, and you're not going to take out seats and make it look like it's unused. It's just we just don't have the customer use inside. It is basically how it works.
Do you have any data on the maximum number of stacked cars in any of your existing facilities during peak times?
Yeah, typically that's another concern as well. And I believe Dublin actually required a few more stacked than what we typically do. I think you guys required 8. So we showed 8. Most of our new locations, if we have a choice, it's a 5 stack. And, some of this, it comes down to our customers ultimately. Panera, a lot of sit-down restaurants have shifted to a drive-through lane or a pickup lane because it's what customers across the board are dictating they want. What was your question again? Just so I don't get too far off base.
Peak stacking.
Oh yeah, the stacking. So, our customers, we're not the typical fast food drive-through. So McDonald's, Arby's, Burger King, the customer base, they expect to pull up there within 2 minutes, be out of the drive lane. They want their food, they want to be on their way. Panera, I think our 4 to 5 minutes is our average. That's how long the average customer sits in line. So our customers know the food's being made to order. They know when they come in, they're going to be there a little bit longer. I think why we don't have a problem is the customers, I think they're pretty loyal on it. Ultimately, I think when they see the stack full, they realize it's going to be a little bit of a wait, and they'll either come inside most of the time. Sometimes they'll even go somewhere else. But I mean, they recognize that, so that's why it's not a problem, or it hasn't been a problem so far. And that's going back to 2014.
Any final questions for other staff or the applicant? Ms. Harder.
I find it interesting because traveling around to the different Panera Breads, you'll have a different experience at each one, meaning if you go to Pal's drive-through or if you're on Sawmill Road drive-through, where one feels like not very crowded because you're in the back, you have a little bit more room, and Sawmill Road really can feel like you're in with the congestion of the of the other cars that are parked there. And you're right, it's not a very long line, but it is a wait there, and you wouldn't want to block up cars and so forth. But how do you feel about that experience? Is it going to be a crowded experience, the one we're speaking about, versus similar to Sawmill Road, or more like the Powell location? And my second question is about any concern about the fire trucks getting through, and is that access to Shell helpful for that? Thank you.
The fire truck access, we don't feel that there's a problem.
Yeah, so the driveway in the rear, which they are proposing to adapt as a drive-through, is not 12 feet wide and does not meet the specifications for a fire apparatus lane. So it is not included in the existing condition of fire safety here.
And I guess just the feel, I had that question. Is it going to feel, because if your community room's full, it's hard to find a parking spot there. I've had many meetings there and so forth, and it can feel very crowded there. If you're there early in the morning, less so, but by 9:30, it's a packed place.
Well, I think that comes back to our stack, and, you know, we feel that the 8-car stack is more than enough. And, you know, the drive-through's taken between 30 and 35% right now, and that's continues to increase over the last 5-6 years. So, I mean, that's pulling that, you know, traffic from inside the cafe and from the parking lot, essentially. So based on, you know, again, a lot of other locations, I mean, everything points to the fact that it would work. If we didn't think it would, we wouldn't be in here begging for it. But
Any other questions from the commission? Mr. Fishman?
Slant. I drove there today, and my wife and I go there a lot. We actually go on our bikes. We live close enough. We ride our bikes there. But I've never seen that parking lot jammed, even on Saturday morning. And I would be in favor of not eliminating the grass on C and allowing them to reduce the spaces even more to keep the green space. And also B, that looks like awkward parking to me back beside the drive-through. And I would be up to eliminating that too and leaving it grass. That's my opinion, being at the restaurant. But if my colleague has a different impression, but the only thing I'd like to know is, can that be a conditional use? Like if the use changes here, can we require the required parking again? Let's say we allow them to reduce it even more, and then McDonald's buys the building, okay? Can we force them to go back to the required parking?
There might be two questions.
Tied to the user rather
There
than.
might be a couple questions down this line. One is, what else can go in there? What other uses can go in there right now as it's currently zoned without triggering need to readdress the parking?
Well, it could be another restaurant for sure. It'd be McDonald's.
While he's looking that up, do we have any other questions from the commission?
Okay, my question is, if let's say I'm the first one to bring it up, but we allowed them to leave C as grass and B as grass, okay, and then reduce the parking even more, okay, if the use changes, can we require the new person to add those parking spots back even more? They're still below the required parking. They got a variance last time. So that would be my only worry if we allow them to do that. And they haven't even asked for that. But
Let's go to Mr. Boggs.
Right. So to actually, of course, this is here for informal review tonight. To actually proceed with this plan or a plan along the lines that Mr. Fishman has stated, they would be coming forward with an amended final development plan. And so that contemplates a particular intensity of use when they are looking at this drive-through and the parking requirements. So if somebody else were to move into this space and be doing the exact same thing, it would not come back in front of you. But if somebody were coming in and proposing a modification either in, the intensity of their use or the configuration of their site plan, that would have to come back in front of
Or
you.
the change of use itself.
Or the change of use itself, if it were going from a drive-through restaurant to a bank.
To it, a change of use triggers
Right.
reassessment
But-
of.
But if
but
this
if
were
it
to,
were
if this
from-
were to go from a Panera to a Moe's or a Panera to, any other restaurant use, that's not a change of use. If it goes to an In-N-Out Burger, if
Well,
it
but-
goes to anything else.
But knowing McDonald's and Panera is a higher end and their density is less than McDonald's, okay?
But they're both restaurants. They're both
Both
drive-through
restaurants. So
restaurants.
The danger in me saying, okay, you can reduce the spaces is that it
Correct.
becomes a McDonald's and all of a sudden we have like the one we have up there at Avery where the people are out on the street
Yep.
waiting in line.
Yeah.
Can I ask a procedural
And I
question?
wouldn't.
Yes,
I'm
Mr.
sorry, I wouldn't be for reducing the 8.
Yeah, and we'll do deliberations, but let's make sure we cover questions.
So we have this application before us.
And just for clarification, it's an informal review. They're not submitting an application
Does
at this
the-
point in time.
Applicant have any desire to change the parking any differently than this?
I'm sorry. We believe this works, but ultimately in the end, we want to drive through here to satisfy the customer. So we'll work with you in any way we need to.
Well, I guess the question is, to go down a path to say, do we want the sense of the commission to be to reduce the parking even more?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that would come back with the amended final development plan. We would look at it holistically. Right now, we're contemplating, does this merit moving forward to that AFDP process? And staff has provided 2 questions to kind of guide the discussion. I have just a couple of other bullet points that I'd like to add to the discussion questions.
Can I finish this conversation super quick? Sorry. So I guess the question, I think what you're getting at is, before we go to deliberation, would you guys be willing to move forward with the reduction of those parking spaces and leaving the green space there? Or do you guys feel you need those parking spaces?
No, I guess I'm not exactly following.
I think they're talking about, in order to improve circulation or queuing, would you be open to reducing more parking in those areas?
Yeah, we can reduce parking. We can reduce parking and feel comfortable with what there's somewhere between the 50-55 parking space range. And we have, 77 now we're proposing? So yes, we could reduce it substantially.
So staff, I would go back to you with a follow-up question. Right now, we don't meet code requirements for this particular application, nor did we meet the requirements that were put on this particular parcel when it was seen back in 2001.
Correct.
Would staff be supportive of a greater reduction in parking?
That is the question kind of posed to the applicant, if their operations could support that. Again, that's for their operations, and if any other restaurant would to come in here in the future, we want to make sure that they have the infrastructure in place for them to meet standards or future operations from their part. But the staff kind of leans on the commission for guidance on this as well.
And I would like to just call out, while we are looking at single applicant, we are looking at parcel that is going to exist longer than the life of the single parcel. And the decisions that we make, if we say restaurants meet a lower requirement than either, we need to revisit code to see what our restaurant requirements are and other uses. Any final questions from the commission for either staff or the applicant at this point? Thank you. All right, so this is informal review. We have 2 discussion questions outlined by staff. Is the commission supportive of the proposed drive-through layout and site circulation? And is the commission supportive in a reduction of parking? I want to just call out some particulars with item number 1. The drive-through layout and site circulation. I want to highlight the bailout lane, the absence of a bailout lane, which is one of our standards. Deliveries. Deliveries outside of business hours have been called out by this applicant because of the scale of the operation, which isn't guaranteed in the future. And then the queuing time that they highlighted, the 4 to 5 minute dwell time per car at a stacking rate of 5 to 8 cars, I put at 20 minutes on the low side and 40 minutes on the high side. And then just highlighting that if it queues larger than 8, we're going to block ADA spaces. So with that, I turn the time over to the commission to express your thoughts on this particular informal review. Mr. Way, could I start with you?
Sure, thanks. I actually don't have a problem with any of the proposal. I looked at it a bunch of different ways, and I think, you know, it's a way to get this drive-through in efficiently. I wouldn't reduce the parking anymore. I think where we were going with the discussion about not putting that parking in is it kind of blocks people exiting out of the drive-through, but there's already parking spaces on that side. So that doesn't really achieve anything. And again, I don't think it impacts the site. There's that really large hedge that's along Perimeter Loop Road, which provides screening. So I think the way that they've handled that situation is fine from my perspective. So I'm okay with the 77 spaces. I don't think we need to go any lower than that. But I would suggest that we need to complete what was not completed as part of the original agreement. Again, operations is your deal, and having employees park over across the street, that's operational, that's not ours. But putting in a crosswalk facilitates that. And so I think that crosswalk addition to me would be important in approving this application.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Mr. Supelak.
I happen to very much agree with Mr. Way on a wealth of things. Mr. Fishman said it well. I've been there lots of times. Perhaps that front portion of the lot is busy, but I don't think I've ever parked past the main door, or if I did, it was 2 spots past it. So I haven't even gotten to the back of the site ever. And to it, I guess I'm going at, Panera's been there in operations on this site for 20 years. That's a long track record of having an understanding of what would work out there. There's a wealth of this that is very operational. Do you run the risk of, gumming up your drive-through with deliveries? Yes, you do. That's a worst case scenario, and that delivery driver will learn a quick lesson if they ever pull through there at the wrong hour. So I agree with you. You have a business to run. You're going to do it well in that regard. So certain concerns about the delivery timing of it, you guys will work that out and make that work because you have a business here that you want to make viable. Mr. Way touched on, it makes sense to eliminate the spots in the back that will potentially gum up the driveway, as long as we're doing this to add back a portion that can basically adjust. I'm going to say the ditch is not a problem. All things being equal, getting to net neutral is pretty agreeable. I also agree that, again, having your employees across the street is an operational concern. If you need those spaces, you will send them over there. You will make it possible. That said, the thing that enables that is the crosswalk. There is a question therein, though, that Perimeter Loop is a big road, pretty wide. Not a especially slow road. It begs the question is, do we actually want that there? Is that crosswalk problematic for us or not? I don't know the answer.
Well, again, part of the agreement was that there be some kind of signage, pedestrian crossing signage. And that comes in many different forms.
Agreed.
You know, flashing, I don't know, whatever you're allowed to do in Dublin, but I think that could be well marked.
And there's also, to that extent, so it has to be done well and considered well by engineering, including, not to mention, I'm gonna say change management. Because we've been to the point of this site is 20 years old. We've been going down that road for 20 years, and that will be a pretty substantial thing to all of a sudden have flashing lights on that road with a crosswalk. So it just has to be carefully considered, but it should be considered relative to this effort. Future tenant concerns. This is fundamentally the theory of constraints, right? You would not shoot yourself in the foot and give yourself less ability to bring in customers by pinning the parking lot too small. Just to point out, we're at 77 here after the modifications you are proposing. McDonald's is at closer to 50. And yes, it has a stacking problem that tails out into the street, but this won't, considering the stacking is all the way at the back, at worst, it's a stacking problem in the parking lot, not a stacking problem out into the street. So there is a certain amount of the next tenant, even if they are a restaurateur, the constraint here, the limiting factor of the parking lot and the amount of customers that can come in will affect how they think about it or their desire for this site. It will also, if they are at capacity frequently, it will drive their motivation to solve that problem in mass, because that is dollars they're leaving on the table. So I'm less concerned about that. There's a wealth of merit to, I think, buoying the business out there. And if this is the thing that does it, very happy to have Panera with a wealth of longevity on this site.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak. Mr. Schneer.
Actually, I can almost say ditto to Mr. Supelak's comments. I look at this as market-based regulation. I defer to the applicant on the operational. You said it one way, I'll say it a similar way. With respect to stacking, parking lot size, I mean, it would, if the market will speak, if the waits are too long because they didn't provide the lane or adequate parking, then it will show up in the business, and they've been in this business. So I think this is a point where, in my opinion, this is not something that we need to second guess. With respect to the crosswalk, not a fan. I now cross over Bridge Street, which is going to be eliminated for good reason. I mean, flashing lights, I think it creates more issues than it solves generally. And that's not a place that's going to get a lot of traffic, other than pedestrian traffic, I think, other than the staff of folks who work over there. So I think as I said, I think it's problematic to add a crosswalk on perimeter. So I would say that I am supportive of this application. With respect to the reduction in parking, I think I get where Mr. Fishman's going, and I tend to agree that less would be better. I mean, the trend is for less parking and more drive-through and everything. I just wonder procedurally if, unless the applicant comes back and says, okay, now that we've heard you, we really would like to reduce the parking even more, then it would be ripe for our consideration. But I wouldn't be take the position now of saying we'd rather see less parking than you've applied for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Fishman.
Yeah, I think it's all been said. The only reason I brought up reducing the parking more is I hate to see green space disappear that doesn't need to disappear. So I'm open either way. As far as the crosswalk, I remember when that was heavily discussed when Panera first went in. I hate to say I remember, but I do. I'm that old. And it was a safety issue. The crosswalk you're talking about on Bridge Street, by the way, the reason that was put there is a young person was killed crossing that street, okay, without a crosswalk. So if there's only 5 employees crossing, I think that safety is pretty important. So I think I'd let staff make that decision. The crosswalk was supposed to go in and didn't for some reason. So I think otherwise, I think everything's fine. If the majority feels that they should keep the 77 spaces, that's fine with me too, and that seems to be okay with them. But as I said, the only reason was because of green space. I thought about reducing this parking, because there's a lot of blacktop in that area. So,
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Sublak, did you have a follow-up
I
comment?
was just going to supplement, right, we're trying to get pedestrians across, across Perimeter Loop Road to the parking lot. We're articulating that in large part, the primary purpose might be staff. At the same time, there's a wealth of, I don't want to say a wealth, there is a ample amount of parking spaces that are very rarely used in the adjacent gas station to it. The parking agreement could be adjusted to solve the same fundamental problems adjacent to the site.
Good idea.
Ms. Harder.
Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight, and also putting the customer first. I hear that. I think it's also important that you're thinking about convenience and families, and I think that's a good thought. I'm in agreement of both. I do not want to see less parking, and maybe it's just the adjustment of your community room when there's large meetings there, people kind of driving around that area trying to find parking. So I have run into that issue there too. And just, I think you're on target for the 8-car stack. And I see that you think 5 is where you're at, and that's probably correct to keep it at 8. I think the connection, figuring out with the fire department that they're comfortable with this and having that conversation is important. And you may want to think about what would happen if you closed that access to Shell Station, and that would be a parking opportunity there too. I noticed too that if someone's picking up food walking into Panera Bread, they're parking anyways vertically in front of the building where there's 2 parking spots. So maybe that could be a vertical spot that you make in that action too. And anytime you're keeping the trees and all of that sort is always important. And I think that following through, again, what everyone else has said too about the safety of your employees and keeping that with the walk away. And thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. Mr. Chinook.
I agree with everything the commission said. We appreciate you guys coming in and proposing this, letting us hear this case. I do think we need to have some sort of crosswalk. I don't think we need to have a major crosswalk, but I do think having an area for employees to park that's comfortable, safe for them to get to the restaurant is important. I am concerned about not having the bypass lane in the drive-through, but we'll defer because again, site constraints mean it's going to be challenging to put it in. And the only other thought I had was potentially moving the handicap spaces more towards the front of the store. So if there is a stack issue, there's a little bit more flexibility there. Because that's the last thing you want to do is have those spaces blocked. If there is, hopefully for you guys, there's a long line of people in the drive-through. I think, yep, and that's all I had. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chinook. A couple of comments, and I'm going to deviate from the rest of my commission. I'm actually not supportive of the drive-through. Just because something is tolerable doesn't mean that it's good planning. And part of our responsibility is to make sure that something is planned well. Bailout lanes are needed. And even with a 2-minute window time, you see people pull out of drive-through lines at a McDonald's. We, in this same shopping center, have a McDonald's where an applicant said, well, the parcel doesn't fit normal stacking. And we said, oh, okay. And we back up on a roadway and we impede traffic and it causes issues. And so while I agree that it would be a great addition, I agree that I would use it, I would hate being stuck in a drive-through line for 20 minutes. And so I think that we owe it to the residents of Dublin to look out for those best interests, just like we owe it to you as a business owner in the city of Dublin to call out some things that we've seen from past planning experience. I would agree with Mr. Chinnock at investigating. I know you have 2 accessible spots on the front side of the property, so moving those, but you called it out, the market's changing. So now closest to the restaurant are the accessible spots, which, well, they should, are also the online pickup in store. But now your regular customers who are walking in sometimes in mid-December now have to walk further and further because their parking is further and further away from the entrance. Additionally, if employees are parked across the street, there's no sidewalk on your site, on your side of the property. It's all on the other side of the street. So in order for them to traverse, even if we solved the crossing walk issue, they're crossing onto grass or they're walking where there are designated drive aisles, and putting pedestrians in a designated auto-oriented location is not good planning. And since we are the Planning and Zoning Commission, those are the kinds of details that we need to look at and we need to concentrate on. So I'm not opposed to a reduction in parking. I would try to challenge you and staff to come up with some way to get a bailout lane. If those could be accomplished, I would be in favor of the application. 4 questions. This is an informal review, so there will be no vote from the commission this evening, but would like to ask you if you have any items that you seek clarity on before we say thank you and let you go on your way on this Thursday evening.
Yeah, thank you for all that feedback. That was certainly appreciate all that. Just to touch on a few things that I think were brought up. I believe it was mentioned that it's possible an agreement could be reached with Shell to provide employee parking there, which would eliminate kind of this crosswalk discussion, correct? So if that's something you are open to as a commission, we would certainly probably pursue that, or at least, have discussions with Shell on that to eliminate all this crosswalk discussion.
So I know of 2 head nods, just looking for another 2. You have a consensus among the commission.
Okay, thank you.
It wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. That was mostly the thing I wanted to bring up. The ADA parking spaces, certainly consideration. We can think about bringing it to the table for the next application. Just a point of clarity on the constraints on the drive-through lane. I don't know if this was brought up, but the reason we can't add a bypass lane is that there's a 50-foot building setback, pavement setback due to the ODOT setbacks off of 33 and 161. So it's kind of a hardship restraint pinch point for the site. So I just wanted to point that out. Everything else, I think seemed reasonable, and appreciate your discussion.
Well, thank you. And we certainly do appreciate having Panera as part of the community. I know all of us patronize the business on a regular basis, and we certainly look forward to seeing you grow in that location. Thank you. All right, next item on our agenda this evening is case 2, Indus Bridge Street at various parcel IDs. This is an informal review, development of a mixed-use development consisting of 5 buildings, a parking garage, an office, and 2 residential buildings. The 6.29 acre site is zoned Bridge Street District, Scioto River neighborhood, and is located north of John Shields Parkway, west of Mooney Street, south of Tuller Road, and east of Riverside Drive. Mr. Hounshall, I will turn time over to you for our case presentation.
Thank you very much. Well, good evening. Before you tonight is an informal review for non-binding feedback of the Indus Bridge Street development project. This is an optional step in a 3-step process. The first step is actually a concept plan, but the informal would take place prior to concept plan. So again, this is for non-binding feedback. There is no determination that is made tonight. Should the applicant decide to proceed with this application, they would submit for a concept plan, which within the Bridge Street District would require a determination at that time. So highlighted in yellow on the screen is the site in consideration today. This is a 6.29 acre site, zone Scioto River neighborhood. It is currently a vacant site. and is bound by Toller Road, Riverside Drive, John Shields Parkway, and Mooney Street, which is not currently developed adjacent to the site. So these images do show some existing conditions of this block. This view is from the intersection of John Shields Parkway and Riverside Drive, looking both east and north. You will see that there is some grade change as you move along this site from west to east. Depending on where you're at within the site, it does increase in grade between 20 and 30 feet. Most of the grade does change as you get towards that northeast corner of the site. So there is grade change that does need to be accommodated for when the site is developed. So shown on the screen is the street network map. The star indicates the block that we're considering today. Riverside Drive is the primary street frontage here, as it is a corridor connector and a principal frontage street. It should also be understood that Toller Road and John Shields Parkway are also principal frontage streets. So these all have very high designated street designations here. One thing that is not shown on the street network map is an extension of Longshore Street through this block. This applicant is proposing to extend Longshore Street between John Shields Parkway and Toller Road, which is something that staff has been reviewing with them, and our staff is supportive of this extension, even though it is currently not shown on this map. And as the site is located within the Scioto River neighborhood, it does have its own specific design standards specific to this neighborhood, and the star does indicate where we're focusing our area today. So the Scioto River Neighborhood District provides a significant opportunity for well-balanced and designed neighborhoods with a balanced mix of land uses. The intent is to create a comfortable, walkable street network within this area that accommodates a large number of uses, which does include residential, retail, and commercial. This site specifically does require two gateway locations, which are at the northwest and southwest intersections of the site. Gateways are points of identification for sense of arrival within an area. They should be pedestrian oriented when they are designed and can accommodate features such as architecture, landscape, or open space types. So shown on the screen is the proposed site plan for this block. The entirety of this block is proposed to be developed with 5 new buildings, 4 public open spaces, and 2 street extensions. The uses within this block are shown on the screen. The multifamily is the 2 green buildings located along Riverside Drive at the intersection of Toller Road. The red building at the southwest corner is an office building. The yellow is a hotel building, and the blue is a parking garage. All of these uses are permitted, and to add as well, all of these buildings do have retail incorporated on the first floor, so each of these buildings will accommodate that as well. The 2 street additions here would be Mooney Street, which is currently, that right-of-way is dedicated currently, so it would be developed with this project. And then Longshore Street, which we had discussed was currently not considered within our street network map. However, it would be implemented with this development. This does create a unique opportunity, which staff has been in discussion with the applicant about a potential for a complete street in this instance. Shown is an inspiration image that was provided in your packet. This would be blending the lines between both pedestrian and vehicle circulation. This is done in many different communities across the United States. It is an idea at this point, and staff and the applicant are looking for some feedback about this design and whether it would be acceptable in this location. And then the applicant is proposing 4 open space locations throughout this block, totaling 1.06 acres in size. This does exceed what is required based on the proposed residential and commercial space. This is outlined and highlighted specifically with a 0.66 acre node, which is located at the center of the site. This is an open space that is built into the grade of the site as it does continue to slope up towards the grand to the east here. As it's built into the side of this grade and the side of the slope, you can see some of the inspiration images that this would be pulling from. And this would be the focal point of this development and basing the development around this unique space. So the commission is asked the question tonight to deliberate whether this is an appropriate open space, whether these open spaces are designed and integrated into this development and contribute to the neighborhood. And as stated, there are 2 gateway locations which the commission is asked to provide some feedback on tonight. There is no design at the moment regarding these spaces. So any recommendations on the direction for these gateways would be appreciated. So shown is a proposed massing of the block in its entirety. You can see Bridge Park Block D just to the bottom right on the screen. This would be south of the development. So shown are each of the uses, the conceptual massing of them, and then the stories. The tallest building here is the Northern Residential Building, which is 11 stories in height. This would be the tallest building within this development, but also along the Riverside Drive corridor. The second residential building is 10 stories. The office is 6. The hotel is 8 stories, and the garage is 5 stories. The shown renderings here are to give you some context of how these could fit within the current buildingscape along Riverside Drive and within the Scioto River Neighborhood District. And then at the bottom of the screen, this is to give more of reference to what has been approved, what's existing out there, the stories and the heights of these buildings. You'll see the current tallest building is the AC Hotel, which is 8 stories and approximately 104 feet in height. And the applicant has provided character images of what these buildings could be in the future, pulling from both traditional and modern styles of character. So on the left, you would see inspiration for the residential buildings. On the right, you'll see inspiration for the office buildings with a variety of glass, brick, and metal being used for these buildings. On the right is the inspiration for the hotel proposed on the site. And then on the left, you would see the parking garage. And there would also be inspiration pulled from existing parking garages within the Bridge Park development. So with that, there are 5 questions to be considered tonight. The first is regarding the proposed layout of uses and the proposed layout of the site. The second is regarding the massing of the buildings and the proposed architecture. The third is regarding the extension of Longshore Street and the potential for a unique design with this street. The fourth is regarding the proposed open spaces. And the fifth is any considerations for the gateway features required on the site. With that, I would be happy to answer any questions, as well as our applicants are here to address you as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hanschel. Would you like to come up and do you have a presentation or a statement you'd like to make this evening? If you could press the button.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Green light. David Kozar with Indesk Companies. My address is 2700 Camden Road, Upper Arlington, Ohio, 43221. We have a group here that will do some of the presentation. We're excited about the project, obviously. We have Miguel and Craig with Moody Nolan here, Sarah with EMH&T, and John with MKSK here. So I think there's a lot to comment on, a lot of discussion. We look forward to hearing from you guys and trying to answer any questions that you guys may have about the project. So.
Thank you.
Good evening. Miguel Gonzalez, 2501 Bristol Road, 43221. Thanks for having us tonight. We're looking forward to actually sharing with you what we're working on this development and having a conversation and really getting your feedback. So I will try to keep it brief. I'll go through some of the major points and then we can hopefully have a good, productive conversation. Thank you. So this is the Northernmost Block. We have some challenges, as Zach pointed out. Grade throughout the block is 18 to 30 feet at the north end of it. We are capitalizing and trying to capitalize on some of the open space opportunities throughout the block to try to use it as a device to really organize things. So we have one of the largest open spaces in the Bridge Park or the Bridge Street district. The central one, which is very close to the node, which is shown on the master plan. We are extending Longshore, which we think, we really did look at many different considerations for the site as far as the site arrangement, street network. We would like to try to extend some of the existing street network as far as bike paths, pedestrian paths, and obviously service, fire access, things of that nature. So we thought that after many rounds of, trials, that extending Longshore made a lot of sense. Not just to create a pedestrian-friendly connection, but also to service the buildings. Next slide. So getting a little closer here, looking at some of the green spaces, we're really trying to activate a lot of these pockets of space. The central one really can be used in many different ways, we think, and offer different opportunities for activities, different ways to view the site, the river. We're also trying to activate some of the corners of that open space, as you can see with some of the commercial spaces that are tied to the hotel and the garage on the first floor. So this garage sits over a commercial space along Longshore on the first floor. And then we have similar, let's call it pattern of open spaces along Riverside Drive between the buildings, which, similar scale and so on along that corridor, which also give us an opportunity to create different, types of spaces, flexible activities, openness, vegetation, places to sit under the shade, and so on. Again, we are lining Riverside and Longshore with commercial. So for example, the base of the hotel has commercial facing Longshore. We have kind of the main entry from that point, which connects back to a drop off along Mooney, which is, very functional. I think that was one of the considerations for the hotel location. And we'll get into the height a little bit later. But we're trying to also then utilize some of these site corners, like the southeast corner of the hotel, to create another open space, which can be shared between hotel guests and the rest of the residents of Bridge Park and Bridge Street. So one of the things that we are trying to do is not just extend some of the urban fabric that's been created towards the south, but we're trying to create our own identity as well. We're doing that by, again, utilizing these open spaces and trying to create something vibrant and different. And as well as, then next slide, please. The idea that we're trying to create a terminus to this Bridge Street corridor on this block. So the idea was to really sort of bring the scale up, create some variety in the roof heights as far as what's happening already with Bridge Park to the south, AC being the tallest building on the very south end. We think this is a good way to bracket that whole corridor, bring the height up, and actually the idea is to really step the buildings up as you move north. So we're trying to create this gateway element with the office building at the corner. The gateway locations themselves haven't really been designed yet. So it's something we're working on and something else we'd love to hear your feedback on as far as how to create these spaces. We are looking at, architectural elements, landscape elements at that grade level to create these moments. I'd like to also point out that we do have some roof terraces which are created with the podium elements. On the last slide, if you can go back very quickly, we do have a pool area on one of these, and we're actually trying to connect those two amenity spaces to create kind of this connectivity and activity along that corridor, as well as different balconies along the office along Riverside. So now the next slide, please. Here we can see the hotel from the north, the Mooney drop-off, and this open space in the corner, which we think is a good kind of a segue or a buffer zone between the urban portion of our site and, what's happening south of us. Next slide, please. Here's a view from the north looking south. Gives you a little better idea of what's happening with the podiums. Another thing that we've tried to do is really vary the podiums a bit more along the pedestrian, ground level where there's a lot of pedestrian activity. Try to open up some of these corners for seating area, green space, and so on. Next slide. Here's a view looking from Bridge Park towards the north. So we can see some of the balconies on the office on the left, the hotel to the right. Part of the idea with the location of the hotel was not just functional, trying to give, because of Longshore location, we have a very limited width along Riverside, that west side of the block or the development. So it made sense to provide a more functional location for the hotel, but also the strategy was to try to use the office building as this kind of gateway element relating to the office building at Bridge Park Block D. So we have a similar height, massing, and maybe this kind of intention of sort of folding the building back to allow some of that view into the site. Next slide, please. You may have noticed as well that we are providing some bridge connections for pedestrians to connect between the garages and some of the residential areas. So those are kind of another form of continuity, between what's happening to the south of us and this new development. And then here is we really wanted to be very, try to convey this as best we could, what we're trying to do with the height. This is a view from the AC looking towards the north. So you can start to see that very last building to the north there on the very left side. The next image, I think is this one here starts to show how we're actually starting to pick up some of the roof lines, some of the lower roof lines with the taller buildings to step back and really relate that massing to the 6- and 5-story buildings before we, go up those last 2 levels, trying to provide plenty of balcony space, plenty of opportunities for setbacks in the buildings to reduce the presence of that massing, as well as trying to work on, some of these corners, for example, here on the northwest corner, providing a little more expansive balconies to sort of break down that scale a little bit. And then finally, we have the street elevation, which kind of gives you an idea of how we're trying to use that 6th floor roof line as kind of a datum throughout the site on the Riverside elevation to step back the buildings, the taller buildings, the 10 and 11 story residential buildings, to use that as a datum line to, bring the scale down again. There is more particulars that we can get into, but at this point, I think we can really take your questions and try to answer them as best we can and have a productive conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have some questions outlined, but obviously first we want to go to the commission for any additional questions you may have for staff or the applicant at this time. Mr. Wade, do you want to start us off?
Thanks for coming in. Really exciting to see this part of Bridge Park move forward. As you can imagine, tons of questions. And I'm going to ask them in probably tranches because I could be here for a long time. So I'm going to start off with staff first, I think. Questions about Longshore Street. That is not an car intersection right now. There's a median that prevents you from crossing it. So that, and I'm assuming from the renderings that would continue to be the case, even though there's other streets that cross and link to Riverside Drive that allow for that through movement. So is it because it's John Shields and it's a bigger road, higher capacity, that we can't link those across?
Good evening. So yes, that would remain a right in, right out access point. The concern is the proximity of the intersection of Longshore to Riverside Drive. So having vehicles go northbound and turn left, there's just not enough distance for stacking there. So that would remain right in, right out.
And what happens at Tuller Drive? Is that just How do you get out of Longshore Drive onto Tuller? Because that's just the right, you can only go right out of Tuller, right?
Yeah, that's also right in, right out.
So you can, but you can go,
Are you talking about Tuller Road to the north end of the site?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's currently a right in, right out at the intersection of Tuller Road and Riverside Drive.
So you will make, oh, right in, right. So, okay, so you can't make the left based on this proposal to get to Riverside Drive.
I believe we would allow for a left turn out, but that is a right in, right out intersection control at the intersection of Tuller Road and Riverside Drive itself.
Okay. And then the intersection of Tuller Road with Riverside Drive, that will not, again, that's not an intersection, right? So at the other intersections with Riverside Drive, we have pedestrian connections. Is there any proposal for a pedestrian connection across Riverside Drive at the end of Tuller? Or would that not be, there would be no connectivity to the park and all that on the other side?
That's definitely something we can look into further and consider. I think that's a nice idea, but that's something I think we need to look into more as this project progresses.
I figured there was some technical reasons why you couldn't do it. That's why I'm kind of asking it.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a pretty large volume of traffic coming across Riverside Drive, so being respectful to that and making sure if there was some kind of pedestrian connection or crossing that it's a safe connection. So that's something we'd have to look at and consider.
Because the interesting thing about, this corner is it's receiving people coming from the north along the pedestrian walkways. And so, how can you get into the project at this corner?
Right.
And is it going to be limited by all the stuff that's going on? Okay, so that was a question. So we're still in progress. When Mooney Street gets built, will the north side of it have a sidewalk and all that?
Yes.
That would be done by the city, I assume, as part of that construction.
Are you referring to the north side of Tuller Road?
I'm sorry. I take that back. East side. I'm looking at the drawing.
Yeah, so the expectation would be the developers constructing Mooney Street in its entirety, and the streetscape and pedestrian facilities would match similar streets within this area. So
Okay.
yes, there would be sidewalk on both sides of Mooney Street.
Yeah, I'm noticing the street trees, but they're not showing in anything. And right now it's just grass.
Right, and yeah, this is conceptual, I think, a conceptual exhibit at this point.
We're at crayons.
Right.
Yeah, I know. But
So for the applicant, we go crayons to Duplo blocks to Lego blocks. You've thrown some Duplos in there for massing and that sort of thing. So that's just the vernacular to make it easy. We're at the crayon phase.
Or an AD marker, and it would be a brown stripe of sidewalk. And
There you go.
Okay, I am going to ask, this is a different question of staff. Of the open spaces that have been illustrated here, there's no designation right now of what types of open spaces. Any help right now for us of where those might be headed? Like, is it pocket parks or pocket plazas or green spaces?
So that would be up to the selection of the applicant, and that would be based entirely upon whether they can meet those specific requirements. I think it's safe to say that plazas is the typical one that we see, usually because it's the less restrictive to be able to meet due to size requirements. I think it would be safe to say that at least 3 of these are going to be plaza, with the larger open space node probably a little more discussion about what that could be.
I mean, I was going back to the classifications and trying to figure out how they fit in, because they all have different characteristics, right?
Mhm.
So again, that's something that I'm interested in as those spaces evolve, how they fit into that overall plan. And then one other question for the applicant, and I'll pause for a second. So could you just go through one more time the rationale for what each building became? Residential, hotel, office? I know Gateway, you talked about Gateway at John Shields as kind of one of the reasons for putting office at that corner.
So, yeah, there we go. So really starting on the south side, southwest, really, the office location, I think that's one we worked on quite a bit. and shifted pieces around the site quite a bit to really arrive at this particular arrangement. And the idea here is the office really provides a good, let's say, companion to the office across from John Shields as far as massing, scale. Not that the massing is the same, but it's complementary. The scale is very similar. I think we have opportunities to create these gateway elements by, opening up towards the corner, creating some landscape elements at ground level. The two residential buildings, really the idea was to get more scale along Riverside towards the north, and that was really driving the location of those. And again, the idea to kind of vary the roof heights. So in other words, to step it so we don't have, two 10-story buildings, but we have 11, 10, and then back to 6, which is then tying into that kind of more common datum. And then the garage, I think maybe a bit more obvious, not so prominent on the site, and good access from Mooney.
So you're saying the residential is easier to get more height than based on program, or?
Well, it was driven by program, number one, because of our, the units that we're trying to provide. I think another consideration was also the views to the river and so on. Especially these amenity spaces that we're trying to create along Riverside, the pool area, and those kinds of things.
Okay, so this is our question period, so I'm not going to make any comments. I'm going to pause there and save the rest for later.
All right, sounds good. Mr. Schneer, did you have questions for either staff or the applicant?
For the applicant, could you put up maybe just the last one up there again? Yeah, that's perfect. Well, first of all, it is a very exciting project, and finishing off this very important part of our city. The mixed uses. So you contemplate retail. Would you contemplate retail? Well, where would it just be on Riverside or on Longshore?
So I should say we're really looking at this point.
So, sorry, it looks like your mic has gone dark.
Thank you. So really the idea is that we're occupying the entire ground floor that's actively pedestrian with commercial space, all along Riverside, down Longshore. So the garage actually sits on a story of commercial as well, along Longshore, the south side.
So you see commercial uses along Riverside, and then on both sides of Longshore?
Of Longshore, that's correct. So the hotel, both the hotel and the garage have a commercial component along Longshore.
And how about the backside of?
So on the backside, that becomes a little more private, a little more quiet. This is probably what we see as the most circulated as far as vehicular circulation as well, which is one of the things we were trying to do purposely, was to keep the very heavy vehicular circulation from Longshore, because we want it to be more pedestrian in this case. So that's why we decided to do the two entry exits to the garage from Mooney.
The one inspiration picture that shows it's an inspiration for Longshore, correct?
Yes, that's correct, for Longshore.
Yeah, right there. And so if it is just an inspiration, but this would, let's see, so it would be on the east side, would be the back of the, would be the back of the residential. The west side would be the back of the office, I'm sorry, the hotel and the parking garage. So the question was, would you see commercial on the floor, on the parking garage and the hotel on Longshore?
Yes, and that's what we are trying to activate Longshore, all the way through the site with commercial space, both at the hotel and the garage.
Okay, but obviously not on Mooney.
Not on Mooney.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Mr. Chinook?
Yeah, a question. So I actually had a question on that inspiration image you had up, and my question was around, it's a very nice piece of inspiration, obviously, and you look at Longshore there. Outside of the parking, the parallel parking, what purpose does Longshore serve in terms of the parking and delivery and access to the building for that? But where I'm going is if you were to take that parallel parking away, could that be not a street? Could it be a thoroughfare for pedestrians that you show here in this inspiration image?
It could be, and the only reason I'm smiling is because we actually worked through that concept before we arrived at, this really should be a street as well as a pedestrian thoroughfare. We had considered a, purely pedestrian thoroughfare through, what is Longshore, but we really think in order to have a functioning commercial, vibrant commercial use, you really need to have that ability to make the deliveries, fire access, all those things that would be still given and still provided with a pedestrian thoroughfare, but would be just a little more challenging because now you're trying to separate those uses. You may be trying to program those uses, the deliveries, things of that nature, in a way that becomes a little more challenging.
Okay. I guess my question is because you mentioned something a little bit different, and as excited as we are to develop this site, I think that would make this a little bit different than the rest of Bridge Street.
Yeah.
So just something to consider as something different, unique, where it's a lot more pedestrian friendly. Because one of the things we all love about I love about Bridge Street is when they close off the roads and they put the tables in the streets. Again, I know you're laughing because it's probably not easier said than done, but I think that would be something that would make this part unique and a little bit different. Again, a little more pedestrian friendly and alleviate some of the concerns, because I have a big concern about what Mr. Wade was saying about taller and access to John Shields. I think that's going to be a big challenge there.
Absolutely. No, and I'm actually agreeing with you because as far as what would be maybe special and unique, and looking back at that inspiration image, we're considering looking at things like this kind of curbless street, for example, which does make it a little more, you get that feel of a pedestrian street, even though it's functioning as both.
And one follow-up question for staff. So you look at this development and it's big. I mean, to me, it's just opinion is it's very oversized for the space, and you're bringing in a lot of people. Traffic impact what's that mean for traffic? Because it's already bad there. It's going to get a lot different.
So I believe that with the implementation of this district, a traffic study was done comprehensively. So I don't believe that a traffic study would be required with this development. That being said, transportation is entirely involved in this, and they're well aware of this project at this stage, and they would be involved every step of the way.
Okay, because I would imagine any previous studies were done based on a much less of a volume. I mean, this is a large volume of people, so I would imagine that the study was done at a different volume.
Yeah, so I think because the buildings being proposed are potentially larger than what was contemplated as part of the rezoning of this area and the accompanying traffic impact study, I think that could be grounds for us to ask for an updated traffic impact study to know what those effects are. So that's something that we would be working with both the applicant and our transportation and mobility division.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chinook. Ms. Harder?
Yes, I just had a few questions. Did you think about moving the office building to the other end? Was that a conversation at some time?
To the north end?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, we looked at several scenarios. That was certainly one of them at one point. And again, I think some of the rationale for the location has to do with the massing and height and how this all reads along the riverside elevation, let's call it. So again, making sort of a transition from Bridge Park to the office building and then the higher elements. So we looked at it, but at this point decided to go with this location.
Have you decided if these are going to be, the residential are going to be condos or apartments, or is that something that you've come to agreement on?
I think we're looking at apartments, yes.
Apartments. And solar panels are always something in discussion right now. Is that something you've thought about, or?
Certainly things that will be looked at. Again, this is very early in the process.
Absolutely.
So we're trying to kind of keep it high level, but absolutely we're thinking about those things and discussing those things. And I think more of that will be, brought to you at some point as far as some of these implementations.
Okay. And then lastly, did I hear correctly that you are connecting the hotel, like a cover or a walkway to the garage, or is that?
No, the connections that are direct to the garage are the residential buildings.
Okay.
So very similar to what was done in Bridge Park. The hotel and the office are kind of, standalone in that sense. They don't have a covered connection.
Is it just too far? I mean, I see it's kind of an awkward, or just a cover or something, because you park your car, you got to head over to the
Those
hotel.
are all things that we need to look at a
Okay.
little more
All
closely.
right. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. Mr. Sublak.
On the, let's see, is it taller in Riverside? Bring up the plan real quick there. Show me the colored plan, which is MKSK's. Tell me what's going on down there at the corner. I obviously I see on the, let's see, the northeast side of it, there's tables and chairs. On the southwest side of it, there's tables and chairs. What's between them? Is that mechanical? It looks
So
mechanical.
that is actually existing utilities, right? Telecom. So this is very similar to what we ran into with the Dublin, the library and the garage. We have to deal with them somehow. So I think that we would be looking at mostly screening these with green, some kind of green and screens and so on.
Got it. And unpack, obviously you have a large swath. Tell me a little bit more about these three open spaces. There's one that looks like a potentially grass covered plaza at present. Another that appears to, I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, sort of amphitheater down. Obviously, there's the sort of Lombard Street zigzag that occurs. Give me a sense for, obviously, that's navigating quite a drop in elevation.
And if you could state your name and address.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, John Woods, 462 South Ludlow Street, Columbus, Ohio, 4321415. Yes, so starting with the open space that's right off of Riverside on the north end with the green. I mean, we kind of looked at that one, and these are very conceptual, just to kind of generate discussion, really. There's a lot of work to be done to kind of articulate what these really are. But we try to provide a variety of open space and open space experiences. That one right now has been contemplated to have synthetic turf in there, maybe some cornhole, casual seating, shade trees, that sort of thing. And they actually both, those two open spaces on that front Riverside, both have a little bit of amphitheater style seating fronting Riverside right now, just to kind of indicate the idea that you could, pull off Riverside, sit down and kind of watch people walk by and kind of as a hangout space. Could be something totally different, a month or two from now. But it's one way to kind of end that. We know we have a lot of grade change to deal with between Riverside and the finished floor elevations of the buildings on Riverside. So that's just one technique to do so. The space to the south of that, we're focusing that on primarily a hardscape surface with large diameter circular benches with trees coming out of the circles, and then filling those circles with densely planted understory plantings. So it's still green, but you kind of meander through circular benches. Yes, in the Lombard Street is kind of the technique we used to create both an experience of kind of getting down to the terraced open spaces that terrace their way down that large open space. The reason they're so long and zigzaggy, we're trying to avoid having handrails. So we're trying to do that with just sloped walks and not like typical ADA handrailed ramps, which get very cluttered visually. Then between all those sloped walks, we envisioned that could be a really nice pollinator garden, something that where because we have an opportunity here to capitalize on the sunlight. Many of these spaces throughout, the development to the south and between these tall, narrow buildings, we can't get sun-loving plants in there, so we're limited to a shade palette. But here in this large open space, we have opportunity to do a lot more up there. So we're trying to keep some trees out of that little area so we can do something different.
And the one up to all the way Mooney and John Shields.
Yeah, that's contemplated as sort of a walled-in garden. Walls don't have to be really high, but it kind of, once you're sitting down in the space, they give you a little bit of separation from the street, from the hotel. So it's meant to be, as Miguel said, a shared open space between, you're going to get a lot of hotel guests spilling out there, just like you will hotel guests spill out in any of these open spaces. But it's also opened up to John Shields Parkway for anyone to kind of come in there and use that space.
And forgive me, what's your grade change? Maybe this is a floor plan conversation and or programming conversation relative to those grade changes. At some point you have to either have commercial that faces the low street and commercial that faces the high street bifurcated and separate, or you got to mitigate the change internal to the space.
Yes.
It could be early.
Are you talking about between Riverside and Longshore?
Yes. I mean, that's where you have right now as one block that is commercial facing both streets. I guess what are you and it's early, right? They're an open shell, so
not too dissimilar from what's happening to the south. Most of the foot traffic comes in off of Longshore. So in a way, we're kind of favoring the Longshore side. And so you're up above Riverside when you're, out there. And the buildings are stepping from south to north.
Right. And at the same time, we're trying to limit how much you are stepping up from Riverside because we want to keep that pedestrian connection. So it would be somewhat similar to, let's say, Pins or one of those.
Got it, which is platformed up off of.
They're a little bit higher, but they're still.
Yeah, and to that commentary, forgive me, I think, to your point, your grade is getting more substantial, right? Okay.
That's correct. Yeah, and actually it goes, from something like 18 feet on the south side to 30 on the north. So, but we're also trying to keep kind of open floor plates. So that's why we tried to step the floor plates at least at this stage. North to south, as opposed to stepping them from Longshore to Riverside, which then means ramps and stairs and things of that nature inside, which is maybe not as desirable.
Right. And then relative to, I'm going to say relative to the hotel here, you are sort of, I would guess that is separated a low level that addresses Longshore and the upper level that addresses Mooney.
That's exactly right. So there's that central space that you see kind of cutting through the hotel. You enter at grade on Longshore and you're essentially in the hotel lobby, and you make your way up to basically amenity spaces and that type of use on the upper level, while the retail remains on the Longshore side at grade.
Got it. And I know, a platform building is a motif on a couple of these, but in particular on the hotel, I think your upper stories are really pulled back relative to the footprint of.
Yes, and that was, intentional. We're trying to, we understand that height is going to require variance, and we're trying to be very conscious of the fact that we're creating, pedestrian spaces, active pedestrian streets, sidewalks. So we want to, step back where we can, and certainly try to do that on the hotel.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions before we go back to Mr. Way? Yes, Mr. Fishman.
I just have a couple questions. First of all, these apartments, how many units is that? I couldn't find it in my material. Was somebody else find
Are
it?
you looking for a total count or per floor
Per
count?
building?
We have 185 units total.
Total is 185?
That's total.
Okay. And how many parking spaces in the garage?
We have in the garage itself
825, I thought.
25. Thank you.
825.
Total 922, but the garage is 825.
With the what?
The garage is 825. The total parking on the site is 922.
Okay, 825 in the garage, right?
Sarah Wilson, 5500 New Albany Road, Columbus, Ohio, 43054. So in the parking garage, we have 825 spaces. On site, on street parking, we have 106. So the total is 931.
Okay, but yeah, I was interested in the garage, 825, that would be
Wait, sorry, say that again.
825 in the garage.
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you scroll down a little bit more, we have a breakdown
Oh, there
of
it is.
825 and then 106 for the on-street parallel parking spaces,
Okay,
which are the parallel spaces adjacent to the site.
okay. And that has,
And I also want to note that we are 9 spaces over the total required.
right, okay. It's kind of a drop in the bucket, all right. Okay, but how many rooms are in the hotel?
I'm sorry.
Hotel rooms?
On the hotel,
Because I assume the hotel sharing that parking garage also, right?
we have 147 rooms on the hotel currently.
Okay. And the apartments, are they 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom? What?
So we have a variety. We have a mix. So I think at this point we have studios, 1s, 2s, some 3s. That's the mix.
What?
Studios,
So-
1s.
Yeah, Warren, if you look at your screen, it has the breakdown of
Oh, there they are, okay. great.
83 units,
There
one
they are, great.
are 1 bedroom or studio,
That's right here. I got it.
83 or 2 bedroom. So that's the breakdown. That's the calculation that I believe Sarah was
Okay,
referring to earlier, is 9 parking spaces over when taking into account all uses within this block,
Mm-hmm.
that's including the hotel.
including the hotel, including the retail, including the residential.
And you are going to do a traffic study? Is that,
We are planning on doing a traffic study.
okay,
for
great,
this.
okay.
And that's something we are.
Okay, I guess all the other questions have been asked. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Way,
We're still asking questions, right?
we're still asking questions.
I just have a couple. Again, I didn't want to monopolize everything, but I had a question about Tuller Road, and maybe this is back between staff and applicant. Because Tuller Road is a principal road, is it required to have some kind of a active frontage along it?
So it's a great question. Yes, it would. However, Riverside Drive would be the priority. So it would be considered a corner, more of a corner property line. But it does have specific requirements listed in code regarding front property line coverage, regarding RBZ, and need to occupy that.
So again, I'm referring to the parking garage, which actually is at the corner of Longshore and Tuller, so it doesn't really touch Riverside. Does it have the same impact? Because Longshore must be a different classification.
So, and let me, I think when you look at it from building to building, so for the parking garage, yes, Toller would be the primary frontage for that. For buildings along Riverside Drive is going to be the frontage. So the hotel is going to be, John Shields Parkway is going to be that primary. So when you look at it holistically, it is Riverside, but per building it is kind of as you were saying, where each one has its own specific
Right, so, but to follow code, the parking garage should have some kind of a liner building along Tuller, is that correct?
That's correct.
So back to the applicant, have you considered putting a liner building along Tuller?
So we looked at a liner building, and I think the decision was essentially in favor of the larger open space. And we decided to, I just wanted to point out, we do have a retail space. I think that holds the corner, the south corner, I'm sorry, the northwest corner, Tuller and Longshore there. But we do have quite a bit of challenge as far as the grade along Tuller there. I think that's probably the most critical grade. So whether it's a liner, whether it's the retail itself, there are challenges there because of that. And limitations.
And I'm just raising that in the context as, you know, there are other proposals that are coming for us along Tuller Road, which is requiring buildings to have a frontage. And so I just want to, I think as a commission, we need to be consistent in how we think about Tuller Road because it's starting to redevelop. I'm going to go back to transportation again. And I'm just going to, so, and this is a little bit of my frustration of looking at this, because if I'm coming from the north, south on Riverside Drive, and if I'm coming from over on Emerald Parkway from that part of Dublin, or there's a lot of population up there. So this is a major kind of funnel down here. And so if I needed to get to, if I wanted to park in that parking garage, I can take a left onto John Shields, but not onto Longshore. So I have to go up to Mooney and then back to get into the garage. Or I go to any other street in the Ridge Park that gives me back to that. Is that correct?
There is currently a turn off of Riverside onto Tuller, left turn.
No.
No, it's currently a right in, right out access management at Tuller Road and Riverside Drive.
Somebody's
So I'm on
violating
Google
the
Maps.
law.
I have a guy turning left in Google Maps from Riverside Drive to Tuller Road. So
Makes it
outdated,
more
I imagine.
confusing, right?
Okay.
There's a median there that doesn't, that
Yeah.
prevents that.
There's a
That
median.
must be really old. Anyway, so
I'm sorry, can you repeat that scenario again? I didn't quite follow.
I'm coming north down Riverside Drive. I can make the left onto John Shields. I can't turn onto Longshore because it's blocked with the median, but I can turn onto Mooney, and that gets me to the parking garage.
Yes.
And that's kind of the route that somebody would have to take.
Right.
Coming from that direction. I know there's obviously coming from the south is different. I'm getting to the point of that intersection of Tuller and Riverside Drive with this development and everything else that's happening is changing. And I know there's this long left-hand turn lane to get on Emerald Parkway. That's the mess. It's the thing that screws everything up. But it just seems like as the world's evolving, that intersection is becoming maybe really important. And could you put a light there, have a light there and at Emerald? And
So I think as part of the traffic impact study, those are things that would be looked at and evaluated once we have more information. So I certainly appreciate the feedback. So I think that'll be something we would look at as part of a traffic impact study.
okay, I wanted to know that the door's still open to think creatively about that intersection. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking back to the commission for any concluding questions. Again, we're questions and we will proceed into discussion. Well, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. So we're going to enter into deliberation. This is an informal review. So like you said before, more of that conversation. We do have a tendency to, even when we close questions, we may invite you back up to the podium to ask or answer a question or two. But thank you very much for your presentation this evening.
Thank you.
So as you can see on your screen, there are 6 items that staff has documented to guide our conversation this evening. This is an informal review. We would see this back at multiple steps, as Mr. Hounshell presented in the very beginning of the case presentation. So we will just go down the dais. If I could have Mr. Chinnock, if I could have you kick us off this evening.
You want to go through all 6 questions or one by one? The discussion.
I would go through all 6. And then we will go, the commission members, if you feel more passionate about one than the other, feel free to concentrate on one or.
And then I don't know if it's appropriate to ask this now. Do we get any public comment on this?
Informal reviews typically don't have public comment.
So the first question is the general site layout. I think I already addressed the traffic impact concerns, my thoughts on Longshore. It's really challenging driving through there, especially to Mr. Way's point, and turning off a taller, trying to get onto Emerald is close to being dangerous. So I'm very concerned about that part of it. Overall, though, the site, I mean, generally I'm supportive of it. I do think it's way too overscaled, and I was really excited about this space and creating something a little bit different, something a little bit unique that's not just more of the same of what's going on down at Bridge Street. Not that this isn't that, but I would just encourage you to continue to think, I think you mentioned it, continue to think differently about what it can be. Very concerned about the heights. I think that's, again, I get the bookending concept. I appreciate how you presented that. I do think that the 11 stories is going to feel very tall there. I'm concerned about that. Sorry, I'm not going through the questions in order. So that gets the architectural character. Address Longshore. I think the open space is really nice, and appreciate you taking the time to walk through that. I think that starts to again create something a little bit different. And I like the fact that there's more of that there, and it could be potentially a draw to the space. Those nice open spaces. And then as far as gateway features, I'm personally not a proponent of it. I don't think it's that important, because I think if we're trying to be part of the bigger Bridge Street development, we don't need to have separate gateway features to make this particular block, it's kind of delineated or special from the rest of Bridge Street. So I would rather see the consideration to keep the flow and keep it more part of Bridge Street, and spend the energy, again, adding those pedestrian elements, making it a lot more pedestrian friendly and making it something different, as opposed to creating some unique gateway feature that tries to make this parcel different, or this block different than the rest of the Bridge Street. That probably goes against a lot of things that planning is doing, but just again, that's my thought on the gateway features. I think, and I had another comment too about the Grand, and wondering if, again, just a suggestion. I know this is hugely impacting them, their visibility. They have this nice green space. They've had this green space there, so I'm sure there's challenges there. So the conversation with them, if there's a possibility, if you guys are doing that, just to, be an advocate, a good neighbor to chat with them and see what their opinions are on this, because you're really, this size of space, the scale of a development is going to be really impacting that experience there for that group. That's all. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chinook. Ms. Harder.
Thank you for being here. It's an exciting site. I also think that you're right on target about the hotel, the retail, office, and restaurants. Gives that unique identity that is keeping the flow. That gets me to thinking about the general site layout. I do think it is large. I am getting on board with how you're going up and down with that look and so forth of it, but it's a massive layout. I go to number 2, where the commission supports. I'm concerned again about the large layout and how that is going to keep moving forward. And then the commission support the proposed street extension. I'm fine with that. I think that's a nice alternative to kind of keep it all, the flow there. I liked the thoughts beforehand of if it can be a little bit more of that intimate kind of experience where you're not moving through cars and things of that sort. So keeping that thought about that. Then number 5, I had down with the design flow. I think you're moving in that direction. The thoughts that I'd like you to think about too is thinking that unique part. I'm not sure that we're there for the green spaces yet. I see where you're doing the zigzag, and you put in some stairs too, so you don't have to do it that way. But where it is now, it seems a little bit too much. But I'd like you to kind of think about those ideas that you were talking further about, that there's a class happening outside. That's a good thing. Dog parks are big, and keeping in that kind of flow there. I also think about the safety and so forth, and maybe reaching out with the fire department. When you're talking about these heights and residential places and so forth. I'm in favor of it being condominiums instead of apartments. But when you look at your rooftops, I think there's opportunities there where you can bring people together up there and have, round the year kind of place where people can meet. And, or you can do, rooftop gardens, or I love seeing trees on top of roofs too, but they can't be as high as they are as what you have going on there. And then think about next time too is we have so many people who are interested in art in Dublin. Our high schools are. There's a great community here to reach out to see how to incorporate all of these things too. So I think that gives me, I like balconies too. And I see you're sort of talking about them, but when building these, I think people like to get outside as much as possible too. And thank you again for coming forward and spending time with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Harder. Mr. Way.
Thanks. Again, this is really exciting. Having spent a number of years now coming down Longshore Street, it just ends. Waiting to see what's next has really been, I've been thinking a lot about it. And you know what this end of Longshore Street needs, and I'm saying Longshore because that's kind of the spine, is it needs an anchor. And the street itself now is almost becoming too long. So now we're adding more to it. So what is going to make this north end something unique and special? And an anchor. And I think, Longshore Street that's the place, right? In all of Bridge Park. That's what's tying everything together. The farmer's market, and all that, and the activities that happen along it. So this section not only, I think, has to continue that excitement, but after you've already exhausted by going through block after block, what is it going to be like? Oh my gosh, I got to go down there. So I think there's something about that. And the complete street thing is maybe like on the right track. I don't know where that is quite going, but there's something maybe intriguing about that. And so I also think about the uses that you've arranged on the site. And I feel like, you get to John Shields and you get to the hotel and the office building, you feel like, oh, I'm here. And then, oh, there's more. Somehow, and I was thinking, well, could you put the hotel at the end? And is that the anchor, or is it the office building? That's part of the scenario. The other part is that it's going to be how the ground plane is crafted, right? And what uses are there that's really going to drag you to the end. But once you get there, it's done. There's nothing, right? There's the animal clinic across the street. I'd push you to think about how can you terminate this experience, because it's not going any further because you got a highway to get over. So I think there's some real opportunity there that you could take advantage of. And I would urge you to maybe think about mixing up the uses maybe differently. The other thing is, I think, from a conceptual standpoint, so that's layout, partially. I'm going to stop there with that. The architectural character, I think all your precedent images are, obviously on track. I talked about Long Street extension. I wish it could be an intersection. I wish there wasn't a median there. Back to the traffic study. Let's look really holistically at this. And that's part of the connectivity is I think it's going to feel like it stops because there's a median there and it says stop. So, but I'd like to focus then on the open space. And you've got a lot of great talent here designing open space. This large central open space, I know why it's there, because you're using it to take up the grade, but it's making it almost unusable, really. I mean, it will be unique, but I'm concerned that the uses there's no uses lining it. I mean, you have retail coming up to the corners, but you've got a big stretch of that space where there's nothing happening. So parking garage edge, the hotel edge. I mean, I think that as a space, and we can debate how big it is. I think it could be bigger than it needs to be for Bridge Park. I mean, it's by far, it's a half acre, right? Nothing like it. I think activation of that space is really important. And I guess I would ask you to consider, is that the right place for it? Or would it be better on Riverside Drive with a building that takes up the grade and then have an open space that has activity around three sides of it? Just to think about that as an alternative. I think Mr. Woods talked about views from the park. Well, there's potentially views of the river, but that building, the buildings in front of it block the view. So you have views of, I guess, Bridge Park, the close-in pieces of it. And then when you go to the east side, you've got a one-story building. So there's no kind of capture of that edge either. So it's a space that's just not well contained where it is right now. And is there a way to shift it? You could make it smaller, some way to adjust it so it becomes much more active and integral with all the uses around it. Open space. So that's I think the other little open spaces are fine. I mean, I think those could be marvelous. There's a precedence throughout Bridge Park of those spaces. The gateway features, I have two comments about gateway features. One is on the John Shields corner. Every time I go to Kitchen Social and I want to sit out on that corner, but there's the stairs down to the tunnel. That corner's just been basically taken out of commission. So the other corner has the ability to become something that's very active and maybe different. So I think that's a consideration. And in Bridge Park, there's been a try to use architecture to create gateway. And having been through a couple processes like that doesn't always go well. I think it's best if you think about it as some kind of open space plaza or whatever on that corner. With that being said, if you go to the Tuller Road corner, the other gateway, there is something that's screaming out for an architectural something that when you come down the north on Riverside Drive, you go under the 270 underpass and bang, right now it's an open grass field, right? It's like, and then you get to Bridge Park and it's okay, we're starting to experience something. I think there's an opportunity in that corner, architecturally, open space, everything to really create that gateway into the whole Bridge Street district, really, everything. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Way. Mr. Suplak.
Like everyone else, I'll try and go item by item. Supportive of the proposed uses and general site layout. Proposed uses, yes. General site layout, I think there's work that can be done, right? Massaging and nuance. Mr. Way touched on a wealth of those things. The pieces, parts are starting to be there, but could they massage and adjust? I do worry that 10, 11 stories is too much relative to the rest of the context. Just as a sort of item, singular item on that, the height is too much. At present, given, and it's super early, so forgive some of this. At present, I worry that the clustering of the residential buildings is problematic. The hotel could entirely be on the adjusted side, on the Riverside side, and have a really prominent presence in a unique way that then sort of defers back to and buries the residential a little bit internal to the entire experience that's out there. The parking garage is large and articulated on one facade, but it's not specifically articulated on the taller side. I would advocate entirely for having a commercial presence out there. It'll be a different sort of commercial presence than the sort of internal commercial presence along Longshore, but it'll be critical for the sort of future development of taller in particular. And I think that would be a miss by all of us if we sort of didn't take a swing at that opportunity. Relative to the parking garage in particular, I do worry that having access along Mooney is good. Having only access along Mooney, I think, will make it hard to find, and if parking spaces are hard to find, they right, they might as well not exist because that's part of it. There's ease, access, and proximity that coming and going from parking garages and parking spaces that makes it all vibrant and work and accessible. Your residents, the way you've built it with the catwalk across, your residents obviously will be well tuned into it. The rest of the people coming and going from the district won't necessarily be tuned into it and won't necessarily find that. Those historically, I think for those in Dublin, the access on Mooney is typically an egress out, not an ingress in. Ingress into all these parking lots happens off of Longshore in a variety of ways. So I think there's danger there that they will be lost and forgotten if there is not an access point off of Longshore. And I do think it's there, even in your current plan, the ability to have that access point and get past the retail, the commercial entities on it. Architecture, conceptual architectural character, mass proposed materials. Obviously, I started to touch on the mass a little bit. The architectural character, you guys, again, you have a wealth of talent on the team. The inspiration images are all chocked full of good thoughts. I would continue to advocate for just generally that there is a variety within this district, that it isn't made to look like it's a necessarily a unified block as much as it is a continuation of the urban fabric, and continue to breathe life into that language down the street. There's one image in particular I'm just calling out. I think it's actually on the hotel imagery. There is a big, massive, really intriguing pass through the building. I know it's not on the plans anywhere, but boy, if that didn't make my heart sing when I saw it. So for whatever that's worth, the variation is good. Relative to that commentary, I do worry the way the two residential buildings are rendered right now. They are headlong towards being matchy-matchy, and I think that I would advocate for. Do not make them matchy-matchy, please. Proposed street extension of Longshore, again, the fabric continues. It seems, I think, one of those things that we probably all would agree, you and we alike, it seems inevitable the way it's setting up. Kudos on that. Proposed open spaces, you have a wealth of them. You're very much starting to, I think, consider them and dance through what they want to be. I very much agree with Mr. Way. However, I worry about the large one. While it's interesting, right? The lumbar approach is unique. I very much worry that none of us will go to, I'm going to say, right, if we're stopping at the terrace, no one will ever sit at terrace 2 and 3, ever. Right? At best, they might get to 1 and 4, but even that, there's seating even before that. So that is a long way to go, and a lot of space dedicated to terraces that at best will look pretty. But won't really be used, which then begs runs right at, boy, that's a missed opportunity by all of us to really create a meaningful space that has usability and usefulness that activates it naturally, right? And I know you're dancing with grade. I do know you obviously have something drawn in here that's starting to think amphitheater. My head immediately, even before I saw that one, started going, boy, is this what we do in here? Does this become a large amphitheater stepped down, including some measure of a stage that, right, if you build it, they will come. And all of a sudden, to Mr. Way's point, I think maybe some other commissioners, you put that in relative to any of these closing Longshore events, right? And that's where the music is, right? Life lesson 68 for my kids is always walk towards the music, right? Something good is happening down there. So that type of activity makes it well past pretty, but invites it to blossom into something that I think would really benefit every building, you guys are proposing right now. That level of thought process, I think, really activates, right? I'm going to say this block for you. So I think you're scratching at the surface. I think you have a wealth of talent. MKSK has done, you guys obviously participant down the street quite a bit. This is the same sort of commentary. It's trying to make places that are unique, yes, right? And the Lombard starts to do that. But how do we really draw in activation and usefulness that is, activates the fabric really effectively for everything else that's around it. Mr. Way touched on some nice possibilities around that, shifting its location, redressing what is adjacent to it and how that, potentially spills out onto it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the same things. Don't shortchange that. I know a wealth of these projects really get into some of the nitty gritty on what's going up in the masses, but this is, I think, where it has to start at this level, at the street level, and then everything else will follow suit. You will, if you approach it that way, every unit in this place will be desirable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so you're creating your own marketing in a really nice way. Forgive me, I'm going well off track on all these things. Open spaces where there are design considerations for the gateway. Again, these are critical corners. Taller and Riverside in particular, there might be no more important gateway around this area aside from, I think, what's on the other end of, right, this whole series down by AC Milan. Coming under the expressway, the terminus of Taller, everything there. I think that architecture could be remarkable and really think through what's there, even if that mechanical equipment is sort of in the mix. I think there is a gem to be considered there relative to the architecture that really could work well. Plazas always work well, could work especially well towards John Shields. Is it a matter of drawing down some of that open space that you're you have in the heart? Maybe. Again, some of these things, I think from, I'm going to say bottom up, you guys know what I mean, this level, the street level, and then it will give everything else a wealth of energy in a really meaningful way. What are the considerations? Forgive me, I just want to hash through my notes real quick. Valuable frontage on Taller. Garage access. That's all I got. I applaud it. You guys are doing good work. Thank you for all your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Suplak. Mr. Fishman.
Okay, I pretty much agree with my colleagues. What's the highest building we have besides a hotel in Bridge Park right now? How many stories? Besides the
I believe the tallest one along Riverside is building D2, which is, it's 6 stories, but it's about 92.5 feet. So that's the building on your screen. That's just south of that office building.
And that's an apartment building?
That has retail, commercial on the first floor. Well, it's commercial on the first floor.
Okay, so
and then office above.
Okay. So besides a hotel, 6 stories is the highest we've got so far?
And this is just showing what's on Riverside. There are buildings
Old
behind
Bridge Park area, okay. What's the highest? Does anybody know?
I'd have to look further into that. And this is just showing what's along Riverside.
Okay, I think 11 is as high, is higher than anything else we've got. Am I correct? It's way higher, okay. I said I agree with my colleagues. I think it's a lot on a small space. I mean, it's not a small space, but you packed a lot, and I see 5 giant buildings. My first instinct was the parking garage. Maybe we should have parking under the apartments, have the same amount of spaces, but not that giant building there. and I know we're real early in the development, so I'm sure you're going to be very creative with the buildings and make them look better. But I think this area really needs to be special. I think we've got a lot of square boxes in Bridge Park, and I think we need to do something really creative here. And I think when you look at this, of course, I saw the preview buildings, but I think we've got 5 giant boxes, and I think for the suggestions of my colleagues, I think they're all really good. But I'd like to see maybe smaller buildings, maybe 2 parking garages or garages under buildings, and more open space. So, they stole my thunder. I had all these notes. Okay, but I agree with what he says. So I think taking consideration what everybody said, but I really feel the buildings are really high, and they're a little almost out of character, I think, for Bridge Park, the 11 stories. And I think that we've got 5 giant boxes there that you have to be really creative with. And so I'm anxious to see what comes along next. I think that a couple of my colleagues kind of gave us suggestions for some of the problems, and I'm going to have confidence in it. It's going to be great when we see it again. But right now, I think it's a lot of building for that site, and they're just big, huge boxes. And they always look bigger in person than they do on these pictures. Anyway, that's my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. Mr. Schneer.
Thank you once again for presenting what appears to be quite an exciting proposal. Gee, I didn't really think about it, but I don't want to take all my time talking about the Riverside Tuller intersection, which is just really problematic. And if this project can help make some changes in that, because it's not your doing, but maybe it can help move something along. With respect to going through the questions, the proposed uses and general site layout, one thing that I think is missing from the Bridge Park area is retail versus commercial. Commercial, I mean, we know the distinction, and retail is not, we know the issues that retail has just all across the country. But boy, I would be in favor of doing anything to engage retail uses in that project, as opposed to traditional office commercial types. The architectural character, the mass and height, I'm not troubled with the height of the buildings on Riverside. I think it actually is additive. I mean, I think you want to see an urban sort of downtown sort of look. Some concern with respect to the ones on Longshore that are adjacent to the Grand. Now, when the Grand was built, they knew, it was in Bridge Park. They knew what that was going to be. But those 2 buildings also would require a waiver for that height, which leads me to the parking garage. We talked about this in an earlier case. The dilemma is that there has to be adequate parking. The flip side of that is we just don't want cars. So, there's this tug and pull literally on a macro level. Do we change the code to require less parking? And you have more parking than is required, which heretofore was always a good thing, okay. But concomitant with that is you need to, what does that parking mean? It's either on the street, in a parking garage, or underground. So I'd ask you to take a look again at how you accommodate parking, and does it have to be that big of a structure? Is there another way to disseminate it somehow so that building, which is the one proximate to the Grand, doesn't have to be as grand? I like the concept, I think we all are saying that the concept of the extension of Longshore. I wonder, the north, as you approach that development or Bridge Park, if you're traveling south, I mean, your project is what people will first see. And so the concept of Longshore / gateway, should Longshore have more of a presence? Should that be a gateway? And then as your gateway on Riverside, somewhere in there, I think a comment was made, let's not, how grand do we want to make that? And I actually think that should be a statement. Approaching, when you're traveling south on Riverside, what you first see is really sort of the entrance to Bridge Park from the north. We have the bridge and we have the roundabout, everything's south. But now if you're coming there, that's what you're going to see. And I'd like to see some imagination there. So that with respect to the gateway, I think the north entrance is of particular importance. I think that Riverside Drive is not very inviting when you, as a pedestrian. The restaurants that open up there, most of the time don't have outdoor. I mean, the climate is not such to be conducive to outdoor dining. There's very little retail. It's sort of a concrete jungle in a small way, and you have an opportunity, because you're now the northernmost part of Riverside Drive, to really open that up. So I'd encourage you, how you do that with respect to retail, or just make it more inviting. Jumping back to the open space, I like the pedestrian Lombard Street. I like that concept. It reminds me, it reminds me a bit of Mirror Lake, the restoration of Mirror Lake and Browning Amphitheater. I think it is inviting. I think it's different. It hasn't been seen. So I would put my finger in the air in support of that kind of design. I think it's an interesting way to avoid the use of the handrails, which can detract. So I'm encouraging in that direction. All in all, I think it's very impressive, and we look forward to seeing the next version of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. And I won't belabor us this evening. I echo a lot of what Mr. Schneer and Mr. Way said. I think it's a thoughtful plan. I think the feel of it is good. I love the street level engagement. The totality of the uses I'm in support of, but I share the concerns of my fellow commission members, especially with the height of the residential. The one thing that I don't think anyone mentioned, we are very sensitive to residential being viewed from the 270 corridor, and we try to avoid that. And so I fear that we're going to have visual manifestations of that residential component as you're traveling, especially the northeast loop on 270. So that's something that the city has not been in favor of in the past. So just take note of that as we go through the Duplo and the Lego block iterations of the program here. I also think that the 11 stories are just too tall, too monolithic. If we're looking at the bookends, I like the bookend feel. I do think the hotel could play that. I also think a business component could play that. An office type space could play that. And I think that there's some other opportunity. I know retail isn't what it used to be. And so we're at the mercy of the market. Overall, I think for a crayon stage, you guys have gone above and beyond. I think the consideration that has gone into the plan, down to the parking counts, the look and feel, the bookends, the totality of the Riverside frontage, you guys have done a great job planning this, and we're looking forward to working with you in the execution of this development. So thank you very much for coming forward this evening. Do you seek any clarification or any additional direction from the commission for this informal review?
Hi, so I just wanted clarification on the left turn. I guess I kind of got a little lost in that explanation of where that left turn you wanted.
So I think we're very early. I think the concern from the commission is we want a well-executed plan, and we share the onus of part of that as a city. It's not really transportation friendly in the area. And so as these plans come back, we encourage you to work with staff, especially with our engineering department, to make sure that we're considerate of not just the uses, but making sure that we have some of the other pain points addressed that we've experienced to date.
I really just wanted clarification on the location
Okay.
on Mr. Way.
So, Mr. Way, if you could speak to.
So which left turn are you talking about?
I think it was on Tuller and Riverside.
Yeah, again, I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just saying right now it's a restricted intersection. It's a gateway. There's no pedestrian crossing offering. And I'm just asking holistically, if we're going to do a traffic study and we're going to really look at this, if we could really think about that becoming a proper intersection, perhaps. And I don't know, it may not be possible. But it just seems like the circulation right now is very convoluted to get into this section. I'm saying enough to have somebody come up and.
Welcome back, Mr. Hendershot.
Sarah, correct?
Yes.
That median is there on the bottom of this image. That median is there right now. If you are traveling south on Riverside, you cannot turn left onto Tuller, right? So Tuller is ostensibly a right in, right out kind of intersection, and I think it's
and the left turn lane for Emerald Parkway starts at that intersection.
Correct.
So,
yeah,
which is also problematic.
It's all
pre
right,
that intersection.
Relative to this is an opportunity again to consider for the city to consider, do we readdress that intersection? I think is the advocacy.
And don't fall prey to Google Maps. There is a glitch in the matrix, as one of my commissioners said. If you zoom in, zoom out, it does look like old and, new mixed. Mr. Hendershot.
So I was just going to come up to mention that. So there is that left turn lane for Emerald Parkway. So that is one of the challenges that turn lane is developed through the intersection that we're talking about. So just wanted to make that known, just to keep that in mind as we're looking at this moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Hendershot. Sarah, did that add clarity or lack of clarity to our concerns?
No, that does help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now that you raised the question, can you put that back up again? Because this is Mr. Way's point. So if you're traveling south on Riverside and you want to get into your parking garage, you can't turn left on Tuller. You have to continue south to John Shields. You turn left on John Shields, but then you can't turn
left on Longshore.
Left on Longshore, so you have to go up to Mooney.
Correct.
So you see, you're basically circling, and that's not your. I mean, that's the way the street is laid out.
Yeah,
now.
that's the layout as of right now.
So we're all sort of problematic.
Correct. I think we've highlighted.
We're asking for your help.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think staff is of the same consensus that as this develops, we need to address what circulation looks like in the area.
Very much noted.
Both auto and pedestrian. I think that was called out a couple of times.
So I had an observation. I wanted to point something out. If you could bring again that same landscape plan, and then I had a question for you. And maybe it's a hypothetical question at this point. I wanted to point out that we do have a very large amount of rock on this site. Very much like what we encountered at Bridge Park. The original plan was to provide underground parking, and that was all great until we really got into that rock and realized, not possible. It's possible, but yes. So the line that you see of that retail between the garage component, which is actually at the Mooney elevation, and then dropping to that retail level on Longshore, is about 50 feet. And that represents where I think we have to do some investigation still. We have some geotechnical to do, but where we, think that rock is really becoming an issue, foundations and so on. So that's one consideration, I think, for some of these discussions on liners and whatever we do in that area. I just wanted to point that out. The question I have is really, you mentioned, I think it was mentioned that maybe we could look at reducing parking. And I don't know, I guess I want to maybe understand or get some clarification on, is it a realistic expectation that if we try to do certain things to enliven the site and maybe try to reduce that parking, would the city actually be willing to work with us to, reduce some of those requirements? I know that I'm not quite clear as far as how the garages are actually, are they at full capacity? Blocks D, C, B, on a.
So in the past, historically, we have entertained shared use agreements, and we have looked at reduction in parking requirements on individual parcels, especially when they're as large as yours, based on evidence that that count is not needed. For instance, there's been an adjacent parcel where they came back and said, originally we were supposed to provide X. We, based on occupancy, based on requirements, we believe that Y is acceptable, and the commission has been supportive of that. However, it did require justification, and it did require staff looking at the numbers and making sure that everything was accurate. So historically, we have agreed to a lower count with justification.
I'm not in favor of a lower count necessarily. I'm in favor of spreading it around rather than have this giant thing, because I think that there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to park. If you've been to Short North, it's a nightmare. I've actually had reservations at a restaurant, driven around for 10 minutes, called the restaurant and canceled my reservations and came back to Dublin, So I think you've done a great job on the parking as far as the numbers. I added up the amount of people in the apartments and the hotel, and I think you've done a great job there. I hate to see it reduced, but that giant building just bothers me, that parking. So as I said, we're really premature. You're really in the early stages, and I'm sure you'll come up with something creative.
I think there's something to be said for, let's agree. You guys are in large part designers as well. Our relationship with parking is, right, love, hate. It's a necessary evil. I'm going to continue to contend that down on the other sort of tail of Longshore, somehow we've done a pretty good job of making it, to Mr. Fishman's commentary, we've made parking present, but not omnipresent, right? So the counts are working in large regards, and you guys are friendly with Crawford Hoying. They are historically monitoring their counts to discern, do they, is it working, is it not working? So that could be some of your data on advocacy for adjusting the counts in this. There is a lot of merit to hiding it, camouflaging it, making the access easy to find and the proximity easy to find, which is why I would still advocate for two access points on Mooney is going to be hard to find, and all of a sudden it's perceptively this area is without parking, right? One access point suddenly on the Longshore makes it, I see the big blue P sign, and make my way in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree there could be some consideration for how does it break up and have more access points in general. More camouflaged in what it is, right? So even things like frontage along taller starts to camouflage it more, etc. The skinning of the garage helps it go away. All of those things, I think, start to have a lot of merit for the conversation.
And if I may, we did look at, there was a reason why we decided not to do the access from Longshore, and it was really, we tried it, and obviously we have to ramp up to that higher grade. It actually eliminates a lot of the parking in the process. But really the main idea was that we wanted to keep it more pedestrian than what has been done before.
And we do certainly look forward to the massing discussion, the overall site plan, the more of those inspirational images, because they do really come together. You guys have done a great job setting this up for success. The inspirational images are just that, they're inspiring. And it really looks like it would be a wonderful addition to the city of Dublin. So we look forward to working with you.
Appreciate that. We look forward to working with you. Thank you.
I want to add your question too. I personally would be in favor of reduction in parking, in the total parking count, if there's proof that we're still covered. So if that answers your question, I personally would be in favor of that.
And thank you.
I think that, again, about parking, I would hate to see you reduce the number, but are you telling us the rock is under the apartments? Is that?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
You said there's solid rock in certain places. Is that a problem with putting parking under the apartments, for example?
Not necessarily under the apartments, referring more to the eastern side.
So it'd be possible under
as
the
the
apartments.
grade starts to rise, you know.
I was just with a guy this morning who was bragging. He lives in Bridge Park and he has parking under his unit. He happens to have a condo, but he said there's a gate, and he said you know all that, and he really loved that. And so I think that would be get rid of some of this garage and get rid of some of the parking under the apartments. So just you know better than I do what you can do, but I just think that's probably the only thing I don't like about this right now, and we're in the early stages, is that giant parking garage. But I don't want you to reduce the spaces. I think that's important.
Thank you, Mr. Fishman. And again, thank you. We look forward to seeing you back at the next phase of this particular development. Thank you. All right. We do have our new case solar panels. This is 21-151 ADMC Administrative Request Code Amendment. This application is a request for a code amendment to provide regulations in regards to solar panels for residential and commercial properties within the city of Dublin. Ms. Noble, welcome back. We are excited to hear everything you have to provide to us. I know that some residents in our community are very excited to get this moving along. So thank you for the time and diligence, and I'll turn time over to you.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties. Thank you. I'm happy to be back. We have talked about solar panels numerous times before the Planning Commission, as well as various boards and commissions throughout the city. This code amendment does propose regulations for the City of Dublin zoning code that are specific to solar panels, and this would include both residential and commercial properties. Approximately a year ago, staff identified an opportunity to clarify how we address renewable energy, specifically to solar panels. This was an outcome of many discussions that we had with the general public, as well as some of our boards and commissions. As the commission knows, the city does have a commitment to sustainable practices. We've developed a sustainable framework plan that's in place since 2018 and is being revisited as we speak. But again, that's a core value for the city of Dublin. As such, planning had discussed identifying a code section for renewable energy, specifically with the entire code. Specifically, it's addressed in three portions of the city, but this would be a holistic approach to solar panels within the city as a whole. Just some statistics that we've encountered as we've started to talk about this discussion. Energy costs are rising both with gas and electric prices. To address these costs, solar energy has been more of a conversation, specifically within the residential community. National trends have shown an increase of 30%, which is a significant increase, and more specifically within the last several years. In addition, there's federal and state funding associated with these efforts and has brought more attention to the topic. And again, the city is discussing this with both our residential community and our commercial community. In terms of our local community, we researched how many permits have been issued for the city of Dublin within the last 10 years. A total of 74 permits have been issued for solar panels. This is for commercial and residential, with a significant amount being specified for residential. Specifically, 61% of those have been since 2021. So again, a significant increase within the last couple of years. In terms of discussions for solar panels, this has been, again, before various bodies, including a joint work session that was conducted in August. The Board of Zoning Appeals actually heard several requests last month, and that conversation will continue at the tail end of this month. And the Planning and Zoning Commission has had several conversations as late as October of last year and as early as September last month. The Commission has generally supported solar and sustainability efforts. We have acknowledged that there is a balance approach to not only promoting those efforts, but also ensuring aesthetic requirements for the city. And you've also expressed some considerations for technology improvements as these advancements continue to happen within our community and honestly as a national trend. In terms of community outreach, the city has made efforts to reach out to our general public with special attention to our residential community. In the last several months, our CPI group has reached out to all of our HOA representatives and specifically brought attention to Senate Bill 61, which provides some regulations for HOAs in terms of regulating solar panels. In the early part of this week, Jenny was also asked to present at an annual meeting with HOAs, of which solar panels were one of many discussions. And again, these are just a multitude of efforts that the city is doing to reach out to the public. Our CPI had also reached out to HOAs and specifically asked a survey to be responded to by the HOAs, of which we were able to secure 24 responses. Half of those HOA representatives stated that they do not have regulations in their deed restrictions to regulate solar panels. The remaining did either stated that they weren't able to address the question, or if they did, that they were looking for the city to provide a solution for them, and specifically location was a conversation that they would be interested in. So that turns our attention to the code modification that we have before us tonight. The commission was very forthright in your comments about solar panels at the last meeting, and we appreciate those comments. Again, the commission did support the idea of solar energy, recognizing that there's a balance of needs for our community. In terms of our efforts to respond to the commission's inquiries, we've met with a host of different entities to try to identify different aspects of solar energy and to respond to a code modification. In terms of specific requirements or suggestions from the commission, we had talked about commercial districts specifically and about building mounted solar. The commission generally supported solar on flat roofs, but did ask for limitations on pitched roofs. In terms of parking areas, the commission suggested height limitations and that that solar panels be integrated into the design of the parking area. As a general standalone use or principal use for solar energy, the commission did not support that use. In terms of residential districts, the similar response had been provided by the commission, specifically that they would like to see the location limited to the side and the rear. If it were to the forefront of a building, that it be integrated into the building. In terms of general comments, solar equipment that performs as a building material would be reviewed as a building material. And although process wasn't discussed in length, the commission did provide general direction of which we've incorporated into the code modification. So specifically, planning has added a section in our accessory use section of the code that would specifically address solar panels. It does differentiate between ground-mounted and building-mounted equipment. It does provide a purpose statement, which we would include in any code modification, but it provides direction for the general public as to what the intent of the code is. In terms of both residential and commercial districts, we've included the 3 provisions that are included at the tail end of the slide. One, that any type of hardware or I guess flashing or any type of materials associated with the equipment be concealed. That reviewing materials that have dual function, again, if it's a renewable energy, but it functions as a building material, that it's reviewed as a building material. And that this is something that we actually introduced to the code, but that equipment will be required to be in working order or it will be required to be removed. In terms of ground-mounted equipment, again, the location is specific to the side of the rear of a principal building. We've suggested that they minimize the view from the public right-of-way and adjacent properties to the extent that it can function, and that's similar to language that we adopted from a similar community. That all required setbacks be met, that height not exceed 6 feet in height, and it's measured according to all other height restrictions within the city. And specifically in non-residential districts, that the lot coverage not exceed 25% of the gross floor area, and that's to limit the amount of solar equipment that would be used on a commercial site. In terms of building or roof-mounted equipment, again, similar location to the side of the rear, only permitted to the front of a building if it's integrated into the design of the building. We added that the color of the panels shall complement the roof, that the equipment shall be integrated into the design of the building. And specifically for pitched roofs, there's several requirements, specifically that the equipment shall be parallel to the roof plane, limited protrusions, that it not extend beyond the roof edges, that it is a single material, that it's configured and assembled to complement the roof line, that it's installed to minimize the corners and avoid complex and non-symmetrical configurations. For the review process, we did have to modify this after considerations between our staff, and because there's complexities based on the areas of the city in which solar is regulated, we simply simplified the statement and said that all applications for solar equipment shall be required approval of the required reviewing body, and that would be prior to a building permit. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Noble. Looking to the commission for questions. Mr. Supelak?
Go back one slide. I suppose this is just, it's a question actually probably for Thad. Are we effective in the language architecturally integrated or incorporated as a material? Is that toothy enough? Is that effective enough? Are they bulletproof enough? We at this point, I think, have an understanding of what we're saying, but
Yeah, I think we have to go to definitions. So if you look, purpose, the purpose of this section is to promote blah, blah, blah. And then we call out that equipment is different than windows. And we future-proofed it, just like we asked for. Ms. Noble, can you direct me? I know I read it. There we go. General provisions number 2. Any solar generating materials that function as a building material, such as windows, roof, or other residential or commercial material, shall be reviewed as a building material. So this section of code refers to solar equipment, which is different than a building material. Which will lead into one of my questions here in a minute.
Does that agreed? I guess I'm still going to, if there are solar bricks, do they get just a carte blanche hand wave because bricks are an approved material?
No, they're reviewed as a building material, according to the
Where
code.
are they reviewed as a building material?
If it's a master development, it would come before us. If it's an individual home, it would go through the building department.
To it, again, are we concerned about, again, if it's a brick and we don't see it, right? Is it a hand wave carte blanche?
No, the building department would still have to evaluate it subject to.
But they evaluate differently. That's what I'm getting at. Are we concerned about that? Because it's approved by our standard. That's what I'm getting at.
Yep.
Because it's a brick and it's past us and it goes to the building department.
Right now, we don't approve brick as it is. So or windows or siding.
To it, a solar brick suddenly gets carte blanche.
Not necessarily. We don't carte blanche building materials in the building department today. If they come forward and they have a shoddy material, they don't get a building permit.
Agreed.
It's not allowable material.
Agreed on the performance, but suddenly and I just want to make sure we're comfortable with that, right? If it structurally performs, are we comfortable with it? I mean, it is getting approved as a material if we don't see it.
On individual residential, any commercial would come, and please keep me honest here, commercial developments, master developments, any of those still come before us, and they still have to present their materials as they would any other time.
Yeah, I mean,
individual residential uses, when they're pulling building permits, still go through the building department, and the building department still has the same ability they have today to evaluate components for their structural.
But they don't aesthetically evaluate.
well,
I will direct toward staff.
I mean, I think that, you have various different, if you're talking about planned districts, whether they be residential or commercial, they're going to have required building materials. I think that the objective taken from the discussion last time was that if the item performs as a building material, so if it had the structural integrity of a brick and the look of a brick, then it would be treated like a non-solar brick. So I think that avoiding that extra step, just because it happens to have some solar functionality to it, is the objective of this code as drafted.
Looking to the commission to ensure that that was my understanding of the last discussion. So looking, and I'm seeing at least 4 head nods.
I played with the language in here, in the draft code language, which I sent earlier to staff. And yeah, I mean, I think Mr. Boggs described it right. But they review this proverbial brick, this window, this shingle, to see if it meets whatever requirement it is. The fact that it also functions, it has solar capability, is not relevant to whatever approving body approves it. And I personally, I think the language in the code, not in the PowerPoint, but this draft language does cover it. It basically says you just don't take that into account. But if
there's still review criteria.
You can't. It doesn't open a door. It just is trying to keep a level playing field.
Agreed.
And not adversely impact something with solar qualities to it. What's your concern that what open?
I guess I'm just trying to play it. Don't get me wrong. We all sort of agree, right? Architecturally integrated, consider it basically as a material. Yes, yes, and yes. There's a certain aspect of this that is, again, there is in any given neighborhood, there are protocol in place for, you know, the choice of bricks, if you will. Does the inclusion, right? Because now we're saying a brick, but if I make a solar brick, I kind of make it different. And I kind of, right, it could become something different. Does that at all? Do we need another catch in there? I don't know that we do or don't.
I think the language shall be reviewed as the building material. I mean,
Correct.
tell me if you think it's vague or not. But that so the applicant comes with a brick that looks different than the sort of standard brick, and it looks different because it's a solar brick. And the applicant says, "This is a solar brick. It functions as a brick, so I want to use it." Well, the way we intended this, and I think the way it reads is, yeah, but it doesn't look like the brick that is approved, so you can't use it even though it is solar.
Correct.
So it doesn't.
So can't we say it has to complement the architecture of the building?
No.
No.
Well, this is just the same quality, attention to detail, and everything that Planning and Zoning Commission, that the Building Department attribute to materials today exists tomorrow, regardless of whether
And we
it's
don't
solar
want to
or
hold
not.
it to a higher standard or a lower standard.
Correct.
The
It is
same.
the same.
So we should add something like that.
No,
No.
I would
This
oppose that because then
code
you're holding it to a
only
higher
deals
standard.
with equipment and is saying all the other stuff that is building integrity in nature is treated with the same deliberation that those types of materials are treated today. There's no higher standard, there's no lower standard, but there is an evaluation and there's already a process that works.
Okay, I gotcha. I think it's like a couple of you said, it's tricky. We've got to make sure that somebody says, well, this functions as a brick and it looks great, even though it looks odd, maybe. I want to use it.
Then the building department could still say no. We could still say
I
no.
worry-
Planning
I worry
staff
that-
could still
I
say
worry,
no.
but there's again, I worry that the building department though does not evaluating for aesthetic.
Yeah, their goals are
I
different.
guess I would be, if I could interject, so I would be mindful, I think, and that's what the chair was saying, that, so a commercial development, you're having building materials approved, which this commission would approve. If it's in a standard district, we would default to then what the code says for that, so you're not seeing that anyway. So I mean, I think the threshold is you're gonna see this, you're gonna discuss this as part of PUD development, I mean, you're gonna understand that, so, and have approval of that. So I'm less worried about that. I mean, believe me, I don't want to be the one judging these every time. So
To the point of if it bypasses.
your mic's off.
I agree with you. We're gonna see it, we're gonna get a chance to evaluate the building material, the aesthetics.
Your mic is off. Sorry.
Thank you. We're gonna, if we see it, we have a chance to evaluate the aesthetics of the solar brick. If it bypasses us for one reason or another, let's say a residential area, but it bypasses us, but it still goes through you and then goes to the building department and you are the catch for the aesthetic of the materials in district X, Y, or Z.
Yes, because the building permit review is not just the building part, there's a zoning component to that. So zoning is looking at the development text, what does the development text permit? So there, I mean, there's definitely subdivisions out there
Yes,
that would
perfect.
say you can have
Okay.
an asphalt
Done.
shingle.
We're not backdating.
Right.
We're not backdating into any development texts
Yes.
that exist and saying, yes, we can now allow any solar components. We're not saying that. Anything that's already passed, they're going to judge based on the material.
The agreeable
Approved.
material, and that's what I was looking for, making sure we had a catch on what is an
Yep.
agreeable material for X, Y, or Z,
Yeah.
locale X, Y, or Z, if we're not seeing it.
Yeah, and we have a process
Perfect.
for all of that. Okay, so to that end, I think we need to strike number 2 under the building roof mounted. We at the very beginning say this section is for equipment. And if you look, the building or roof mounted equipment is the section header. But number 2 says building or roof mounted equipment is permitted to the front of a principal, blah, 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 only if it's integrated the architectural detail. Well, we've already said at the beginning of the section of code, that stuff, the stuff that's integral to the building, the shingles, the windows, the bricks, the anything else is going to be dealt with separately. So calling out that we will allow that equipment that's not equipment to be on the frontage, the principal frontage, I think we need to remove that. That I would look to you for either correction or.
So it basically defaults to 1 to dictate location.
Well,
it dictates 1 as a location requirement. I'd be fine with that.
And if we wanted to expand 1 that says is permitted only to be located at the side or rear and is not permitted on the front or something like that, I'd be fine with that. I just think that 2 doesn't fit. Other questions, comments were because we did discussion, we're just a little bit less formal this evening. Mr. Way.
You all got into the details, and I was going to step back a little bit. So anything that's non-residential is a commercial district? Or just as a,
Opposed to multifamily?
well, this is residential and commercial districts. Does that include industrial and institutional and?
I mean,
Or is it just residential and non-residential?
Well, that's where I was going. Is that term?
Sure, we can.
I found it.
Does commercial catch everything?
That's a fair point.
Yeah, we can change that. I mean, the West Innovation has its own separate set of standards related to this, so that's getting caught, but I appreciate that. We can change that. That's fine.
So that was just one thing. And then as I was going through it, I know what I think the intent was that we were going to combine residential and commercial districts. But I just wondered, it's mix and matching in some places. And would it be better just to have one that's for residential and one that's non-residential? Even if it's repetitive in some forms, but just for clarity.
I mean, we did look at that because the discussion last time was very much focused on the residential versus non-residential. And when we looked at the requirements, they were essentially the same. So that's why they were ultimately consolidated.
But when you mix in one that's then about a commercial district, then it's like, oh, like it catches me. It's residential.
I mean, honestly, I feel like the only thing related to the commercial district that's different is that percentage of lot coverage.
I'm just saying that
Yeah.
some of those things just caught me. Like,
Okay.
oh, we're talking about commercial now, not residential, because it's mixed. It's all mixed up.
We were trying to simplify this as much as possible, but if we've lost something in doing that,
Is it just a merit of having residential specific stipulations and non-residential specific stipulations captured?
I mean, we didn't find anything.
I can see reading
The
through.
duplication. I mean, it was like 4 pages. It was basically copying and pasting, and then we had like 1 or 2 different items for commercial only. That really didn't seem like a good use of.
But if I have a commercial property, I just want to go to the commercial. I don't care about the residential.
Oh, that doesn't. This is where you would go.
Yeah.
Period. Okay.
I know, but I just want to get to the points that I need to know.
Yeah, I think he's just saying it's easier to read, I think is that what you're saying, Mr. Way?
I mean, there's not a separate non-residential section of the code. Is that what you're suggesting? Like,
No, I just wonder if you could separate it out in this section.
No. I think what Jenny's confusion is today, solar aside, you don't go to a section of code that is commercial in nature and go to a different section of code that is residential in nature. You go to the code that is applicable.
Right. But
And so solar.
Is there a
falls.
way within this to parse out? But maybe, is there a table? Zoning codes have tables. Maybe there's a table. I don't know. Maybe I'm confusing. Just those things were catching me when I.
So can you point out, so Ms. Roush said earlier, there's only one thing that only applies to one and not the other?
That's number 4 in the ground mounted equipment. Ground mounted equipment in non-residential districts. So again, we're using the word non-residential and the category is commercial districts. So anyway, that was one that just stood out to me. I caught that one. Maybe that's
Yeah,
the
it's
only-
just the title on the, it's just the header. That's not going to be at the very top of the page where it says residential and commercial districts. That's just our naming. That's not going to be in the code. That was just identifying that. Sorry.
So one question that I have for the commission is, there's a call out in there that says color shall be complementary to the roof. We are already requiring that these are not on front facing. So I just want to ask the question, and I am not advocating one way or the other. Is that still a concern if it's on a non-facing, non-adjacent front nor?
Yes.
It's still a concern?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm seeing 4 head nods. So
Yes, I mean, I think that's a great point. So like in Oak Park where they have a really red color roof, distinct roof, then people can't have solar panels. I just want us to be clear about what we're saying here.
Yep.
So. Okay.
And
Unless they make a
then-
red version, I guess. Yeah.
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 And then question again, there is in general, in the ground mounted, number 2 says that, and again, consider we're in commercial districts, we're in residential districts. Ground mounted renewable energy equipment shall be sited to minimize view from public right-of-way, adjacent properties, and shall be camouflaged to the extent that the equipment can function normally. So the question that I have is, does that mean that because the sun comes up and I have no trees on that parcel, that I want it to function normally from the time the sun rises to the time the sun sets with no shrubbery, no anything from the horizontal plane of the panels? I think I could argue it doesn't function normally until 11 o'clock and stopping at 3 o'clock because my shrubs come up 4 inches above. So and that may be more for you. I didn't like the function normally. You have to camouflage it unless you can argue that it's not functioning normally. And how do we define?
I was just going to say, how do you define normally?
Exactly.
Is that 100% like?
All the time?
I can't, because it's never going to be 100%.
Exactly. So.
If I can add, I think it being camouflage is important. And,
I would agree.
so then because of that, that is the homeowner's situation that they're in, if they can't, come to
Utilize.
And just to, again, beat this, so the word camouflage was a red flag for me.
Screened.
How about screen?
I wrote
Screened.
screen, yes, that would be
That's
acceptable.
Throughout the code,
I had
screened.
this vision of one of those
Right,
army
netting.
like tarps that's camouflaged.
Oh, we are a little punchy this evening.
Yes.
I think screen's better.
All right.
I guess
So-
I had a question on that too, and I read it, like, I feel like that whole line, that and shall be camouflaged could just be struck from the whole, I mean, I don't know why we need to say that in there. Because they're not gonna install equipment if it can't function normally, so I don't know, we need to stipulate it, so I don't know why we wouldn't just say.
But we still need to screen it from the surrounding neighbors.
Right, but
It
we'd
can't
say,
just be
that would just be minimized the view from the public right of way and adjacent properties. That's it.
Well,
But
again,
minimizing view means
And
I'm kind of hiding
you
it.
could add screening in there, but I don't know that we need to get into so it functions properly. I think that's up to.
Oh, that part. You're okay
Yeah.
with screened.
Why are we telling them how to, they're not gonna install if it doesn't function?
Yeah, I do want to look at the other side of that. My neighbor has solar panels and I can see them out my 2nd-story window and the code says it has to be screened, so I want to cover on it.
No, I agree with you. No, I agree with the screening part. I'm just saying, I don't know that we need to get, the question about function normally to me is throwing me off.
And I think that's advocating for the user to be actually not have to screen the whole thing from their 2nd-story neighbor because the 2nd-story neighbor can see it. So I think that's trying to balance.
Yeah, the question is how specific.
Exactly.
So we can't be too vague, arbitrary, capricious. You could use modifiers. You could say adequately screened, but what now somebody has to adjudicate what adequately
Correct.
means or reasonably screened. But to your point, if you go too, then you're really in the weeds, and screening does not. Screening means from the horizontal sight line, but not the vertical, and so if we're not troubled
How do we do,
adequately,
how do we
Mr.
do
Boggs?
mechanical equipment today? How do we define how we screen mechanical equipment today? Because we don't require that that's completely occluded. We need airflow to HVACs and all of that. So how do we call that out today?
I mean, the code does require that it's completely screened. I know that we allow for spacing for functionality. But that, I mean, everything that you're talking about is our dilemma, if you will. And I think that's, at least in the section that you were just referring to, intentionally use the word minimize, because you would be completely incapable of making it non-visible to everyone. So we were trying to balance.
Yeah.
Does the code completely screen for other mechanical equipment include vertical sight lines? To her point, to her scenario of looking out her window.
This is from the right of way, meaning that you're at ground level.
Right. We've done that for years with pine trees. You say they have to be opaque. Okay.
And
for mechanicals, we're not talking about the cell, I assume. We're talking about the mechanicals on the ground.
I mean, service
Adjacent
structures have to be screened to the full height of the unit up to 12 feet. So if you have a.
To it, you vertically you can see down in. To it, if that standard is agreeable for other mechanical equipment, can we make it? Can we make that agreeable here too?
But
not.
But I wouldn't want to cover to the full height because you're potentially, I don't know.
Well, I think it could be. I think it could be covered to the full height, albeit there may be times of the day when it gets some shade because of the angle of the sun, but at least if it's covered to the full height, however, the highest level to which it can tilt.
Yep. And just for clarity, of the activity that we've seen, we saw the 2021, we saw the 22 numbers. How many of those are roof mounted and how many of those are ground mounted?
Yeah, all of them are building.
We're talking about the cells now?
Yeah,
we were talking about the ground mounted panels and
the ground
equipment.
mounted panels. Okay.
But
those can be
it's
easily screened, right?
The good news is the sun's in the air as well. So.
Yeah.
Right. If you put
we don't want to screen it from the sun.
boxwood around it, there are going to be times when at certain times of the day, the sun is not going to come in at the right angle to maximize that. But if it is, I think that it makes sense if we want more specificity than just adequate or minimize, just to say up to the, maximum height of the panel.
Does the code have like for fences and stuff?
Yes.
Like that? Isn't it like 6 inches above the tallest?
I think we would just default to what the service structure screening requirement is, because that gets to your point and then what we're all saying in terms of the maximum height.
Yeah.
Yep. So if we could pause and just, I want to make it a little easier on Ms. Noble. If we could clarify, we are looking to forward a recommendation to City Council this evening. So if we could, I have the removing number 2 on the building roof mounted. I need consensus, looking to the commission members. I'm seeing a couple, 4. Okay, so we have direction there that we want to remove the building roof mounted non-applicable section. And now the screening in ground mounted equipment 2, we want to strike camouflage. We want to say adequately screened. Is that correct? I'm seeing head nods. Adequately screened. And do we want to strike to the extent the equipment can function normally?
I think, and we have, I believe we have that construction elsewhere in the code, which was where.
So if we could copy and paste.
So we may need to, look at that, where that language was cribbed from in the first place. But I think that the thing to do is, instead of saying adequately screened, because then you do get into this sort of adjudicating what is or is not adequately, just say screened.
According to
the general standards for service equipment.
Okay, I'm good with that. Looking to the rest of the Yep. We're just changing the camouflage and calling out to actual screening that matches the rest of the code.
with code standards for mechanical.
The same thing we do with air conditioning.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, looking, yes, Mr. Way,
Number 4, under building or mounted equipment.
your mic.
It says is permitted provided it extends no more than 18 inches beyond the roof line. And then in 6, it says for pitched roofs and roof mounted solar equipment will not extend over the edge of the roof line.
Oh,
One commercial and one residential?
no, I think one was below, like over the edge of the roof line. One is on top of the roof.
I
That's
don't think it
exactly
should extend beyond the roof line in any case.
But you can't, it
Yeah,
has to be above the roof line if it's solar mounted equipment on top of the roof. What we're saying is,
I'm not buying that.
It should say above.
Yeah.
It should say above the roof line.
The 18 inches.
here, but it's 18 inches above the roof.
That says the roof line.
Maybe instead of roof line, instead,
Can I see that?
I interpret this as it can extend 18 inches above the ridge line of the roof.
Oh, and I don't think that's.
That's how I did.
yeah,
I thought it was
Noble.
extended down
So just to be clear,
bottom.
it's a separation between the roof and where the solar panels can be.
Yeah, it's the vertical.
yeah, maybe we can say 18 inches above the plane of the roof. None
Yes.
shall extend above the ridge line of the roof, and none shall extend beyond the edge lines of the roof.
Correct.
It's the dimension that's set off the roof line.
Yes.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Correct.
That comment.
Yes, sorry, that's what I was trying to illustrate.
Talking about different axes.
Can I see that? You're saying it's gonna be even with the roof.
It's going to be, it's not going to exceed. So if I have my roof line, let me do it on the side.
That's okay.
That is my roof, right?
Yeah.
I can put solar panels there,
Inside the,
inside the plane of the roof,
yeah.
18, up to 18 inches
Parallel with the face.
parallel, but the solar panels cannot exceed the roof line. They can't go outside of the ridge line or
Okay.
the,
Okay, that's right. Okay, so 18 inches is inside, not outside. I didn't understand that when I read
Can
it.
it say no more than 18
Above.
inches above the plane of the roof?
Mhm.
And then in number 6, it says it cannot extend over the edge of the roof line. That picks up the other dimension.
correct,
That would be perfect.
correct.
I would feel so much better.
Okay.
Should the 18 be 12?
Most of the code, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of the code from communities that we found like all over is 18 inches is kind of the standard. And
I mean, it's
you have to put
sizable,
in half.
and we don't see that. When you see it, it is
It's very, yeah,
6.
it's maybe a couple inches and then it's the width of the panel, right? So it's.
did you get feedback from solar providers? Did they say what their requirement was?
I know the number's decreasing, if that answers your question. And the reason why we picked 18 is because it's similar to the other districts that allow it, just for consistency.
Can
but-
we do 12 and have them ask us, pretty please, 18?
So if somebody goes with 18, it's going to be obnoxious.
Yeah, can we
I
do
agree.
12?
We need to come up with the right dimension.
And then if the
not 18.
providers come back and say 12's not enough, we need a minimum of 14, then we go out to 14.
We can do that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. The commission looking, seeing
I think you're safe.
4.
I think
Okay.
you're safe at 12. I think you could even go less than that. Let's go 8. What's that? I know, right?
I just don't want them to say, yeah, there were lip service, they were paying lip service, well, you can't actually do it at 8, but. Okay,
I mean, it's when we see
12,
it,
and then as we see applications, if 12 needs to be shrunk, can we rely on staff to have you come back and say, okay, the building department, they're only granting and it's 6 inches, it's 8 inches, then we can draw in the restrictions? Nobody's going to say, ooh, we want to sell an 18-inch because.
I mean, we can, I'm assuming we can make these conditions of this recommendation going to council. We can investigate that before it goes to council and have a
Perfect,
number.
because we're not the approving body on this.
Right.
So we're going
Okay.
12.
We're going to 12.
Or 8.
Or
I mean, we can
Well,
look at what the
What we
appropriate
just said
number
was we would go to 12.
Yeah.
Staff would then do research, and before they took it to city council, they could recommend even, exactly.
I think thumbs up on it should be tight. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
tight, as tight as you can get it.
exactly,
Yeah, so if it ends up being 8, then we can make it 8. So I mean, let's
exactly,
We're all in
exactly.
favor. We're all in favor.
All right, any other questions, concerns? Ms. Harder?
I have a concern in thinking more about damages and what happens after and the upkeep of this. And if that needs to be brought into this code as well. We have one little a statement where it says working order or be removed. And I look at the state law.
Yeah, so
I get concerned about that because it gives a lot of stipulation about what kind of recourses people have as well as HOAs have and the importance of that.
So staff, can you just speak to general upkeep of, it doesn't matter if it's a solar panel or an eave or a rain gutter or a window or anything like that, what the city has recourse or solar brick?
It says.
We're
all
inventing
solar
products up here. He should like file for
Yeah,
patents.
I mean, we do have regulations for property maintenance that, again, I don't want to make this overly complicated, but that would come into play if it's distracting from the property. We could use those regulations.
So then you're saying that maybe that would be a nice discussion with the HOAs about that because the state law kind of came out with some definite things that they can do for recourse, how to handle when something goes wrong with one and they're looking bad, as well as what your city can do too. I think, and I understand you have different services and so forth, but in that integrity of that, I think is important too. So,
Right. I mean, at least to my knowledge, if you and I are thinking of the same recent state law, it's harder. It does not really speak at all to what the city can do in enforcing its regulations. And so if there were a busted panel, I would envision it being treated the same as a broken window, where resident has a reasonable amount of time to fix it on their own. But if they fail to live up to that responsibility, then it goes to code enforcement to make them do it.
Exactly.
Good.
Either repair it or
remove it.
Thank you.
Number 3 here says that it's got to be maintained.
Correct.
Or removed, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Ms. Harder was just saying, is that enough teeth? And we directed to, we have current
The city
standards.
can enforce that, right? That's
Absolutely.
the city part.
Absolutely.
The maintenance code.
Because I see a problem with these things becoming obsolete, that eventually they'll all look like the Tesla ones. They'll get cheaper and cheaper and so on. And so if they and cease to be used. I'm old enough to remember TV antennas, and you can still go to parts of town here and see rusty TV antennas hanging off of chimneys, okay? And they're not required to take them down, okay? And probably in Dublin you are, but so I think that's something we need to look at, that if it's not functioning, you got to remove it.
Yep.
You know?
All right, so we have ground number 2 is screened in accordance with standard service equipment addressing in the code. We have the striking number 2 under the building roof mounted. We have the roof line shrink from 18 inches to 12 inches. Are there any other items that the commission would like to discuss or highlight or change?
Let's just step back for a second. So the term renewable energy is used through here, and it's defined. There is dash solar, but other areas it's under E, it says renewable energy equipment. Is there in the code other renewable energy equipment guidelines that? So is this falling into that? Or should this also say solar?
Could we just add solar? Because this section does specifically talk about solar equipment. So in E, could it just say renewable energy equipment dash solar? And then as we have other opportunity for renewable energy, then we can look at those separately.
Right. That's all. Just being consistent.
Perfect.
I have a question about number 1, where it says it should be installed to conceal the frames and the flashing. I've never seen one that doesn't have, you can't see the frame. That means the shingles or something would have to come right over the,
No. So they have some where the flashing is actually internal, so the solar panels go edge to edge. They almost look frameless.
okay, they're not, so they're not, well, if they're sticking up 12 inches, they're going to have a frame around it.
Not necessarily. The solar cells themselves can go to the bleed edge.
Okay. Okay.
So that you're still going to be able to see that they're solar panels. There's
Yeah, okay. Well, this says the frames and flashing and fasteners and hardware are concealed.
Yeah, we just don't want big old brackets on the side holding them together and looking like Frankenstein installed
Okay.
solar
I mean,
equipment.
I'd like to see them without frames, but they're,
Yep.
everyone I've seen is framed.
All right. Okay.
I have a public comment that came in earlier today. It is from Jillian Dyer. She's at 2273 Indian Avenue in Columbus, Ohio. Says, I am not a resident of Dublin, but I work for a solar company based in Dublin and have considered moving to the area. I recently joined a resident to apply for a zoning variance for roof-mounted solar panels, as there was no other viable place to install them. It was disappointing and disheartening to find that there is a code being enforced that is not actually written. And while a resident could build a shed with a front-facing roof and install solar on that, they could not put them on their house. However, I'm writing today as a citizen of Central Ohio and as an advocate, activist for climate issues, clean energy alternatives, individual choice, and individual property rights. People who end up in homes that are automatically disqualified from having solar because of a lack of zoning code are at a disadvantage, whether they are looking for financial or environmental benefits. This also impacts the wider community. As a renter, I don't have the option to install solar. More people producing power through their solar panels when the excess production goes back onto the grid is good for all of us. Studies have shown that solar panels increase not only the value of your home upon which they're installed, but your entire neighborhood. People who can't install are still benefiting. Many jurisdictions have limitations on solar, including provisions that don't allow solar to be installed on street-facing roofs. However, there is almost always an avenue for residents to install if they have no other options. This usually occurs when the only usable roof plane faces the street. In Central Ohio, roof panels should not be installed on north-facing or excessively shaded planes. They do not produce enough energy for it to make sense. Banning solar outright for people who cannot install on side or rear-facing roofs only creates a vacuum for non-reputable companies to take advantage of people who aren't allowed to install the most efficient options. It's 2022. We do not have more time to waste when it comes to climate issues. Taking action has been pushed onto individuals for so long, but we should not be creating roadblocks for people who want to take action and not allowing individuals to play a role in a systematic issue. Please consider moving quickly on this issue.
Thank you, Ms. Roush. And I know that some of those sentiments are shared by a lot of the city of Dublin, even though she is not currently a resident. All right, so we have modifications made this evening that have been discussed and documented. I, at this point, will entertain a motion for recommendation of approval to City Council for the administrative request code amendment concerning solar.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Supalack. Thank you, Mr. Way. Ms. Beal.
Mr. Schneier,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman,
Yes.
Mr. Shinak,
Yes.
Ms. Call,
Yes.
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 Thank you, Ms. Beal. Well, thank you. That's been a fun one, as we saw at the beginning of the presentation. We've seen it a few times, so thank you. I know that we've seen it, but Ms. Noble, I'm sure that you've seen it about, well, 100 times more than we have. So thank you for your diligence in preparing all of that information for us. Does look like we have a few communications this evening. So Ms. Roush, I'll turn time over to you.
Thank you. I do have a procedural thing. At the beginning of the meeting, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but there was a set of minutes from August 31st for the joint work session that need to be approved. You only called out September. So would you mind making a motion and approving those if everyone's in agreement for that?
Can I have just a minute? I don't think I read those before the meeting.
Yeah. And has council already approved those, Judy?
Sorry.
Did council already review and approve those, the joint work session minutes?
Council did, yes.
Yes, okay.
Each of the
I
bodies has
missed
to.
I mean, we can wait till the next meeting if you want to have time to review them. That's perfectly fine.
It'll
so.
take me 30 seconds
Okay.
if the commission's patient with me. We talked about solar panels. Mhm. And just one note, as I scanned through 11 pages and read everything I said, Ms. Beal, you and the team do a fantastic job, and it makes it ever so helpful that the person's name is at the front of the line, because then I can say, did I say, did I say, did I say? Okay, I'm good. So thank you. I know that we don't say that often enough. Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve meeting minutes from the joint meeting on August the 31st.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Supelak.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Schneer. Ms. Beal?
Mr. Way,
Yes.
Ms. Harder,
Yes.
Mr. Supalack,
Yes.
Mr. Shinak,
Yes.
Ms. Call, Mr. Schneer,
Yes.
Mr. Fishman. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Beal.
Okay, then my other quick announcements. Their evening of gratitude, which we started this last year, that's organized through our volunteer services group. That is to recognize all of you for volunteering your time throughout the year on our boards and commissions. So that's extended to all board and commission members and appointees by council. So that is going to be November the 2nd at 6 o'clock at the Exchange. You should have gotten an email request, but if you haven't, and a card and something mailed to you, okay. I'm sure there's an RSVP for that, so please do so we can account for who's coming. And then cybersecurity training, you should have received notification of that as well. And if you have any trouble or any issues with that, please let me know. That has to be completed by November 25th. And IT will hunt you down if you don't do it. So I would recommend doing it. And then in terms of meeting dates, we're working on those for next year. We are approved through February, but we will bring them before you well before that. So be looking for that in your next packet. And then our next meeting is then on November 3rd. So there'll be the evening of gratitude, and then we will then have a meeting the very next night. So busy week.
Thank you, Ms. Roush. Any communications from the commission? Well, ladies and gentlemen, another fun-filled Thursday night, and thanks for joining us. Meeting dismissed.